Good evening and welcome to the Sleep to Law series. Tonight we will talk about Needful Things, the story of a small town in Maine called Castle Rock, and the shop that changed everything during one crisp October in 1991. If you would like to see more stories like this, please subscribe or leave a comment down below. Before we begin, I have a question for you. If you could buy the one thing you desire most in the world, what would you be willing to pay for it? Comment below with your answer. Now let us begin the story. Prologue. Return with me now to the geography of memory, to the crisp, dying light of October in western Maine. There is a specific psychology to a place like Castle Rock, a rhythm dictated by the departure of the summer tourists and the settling in of the locals. It is a time of contraction, where the community turns inward, and in that closeness, old scars begin to ache. We find ourselves on the town common bandstand. It is a vantage point for observation, a place to witness the sociology of small-town friction. You see, the Rock is fueled not by goodwill, but by aggravations, those petty, enduring grievances that give a quiet life its narrative tension. Note the flyers fluttering in the wind. Dice and the devil. This is the visible surface of a deep theological fracture between the Baptists, led by the fervent Reverend Willie Rose, and the Catholics under Father Brigham. The issue is a casino night fundraiser, harmless to some, but spiritual warfare to others. But looking closer, we understand that this isn't truly about gambling. It is about territory and tribalism. It creates a chill in the air colder than the autumn breeze when neighbors like Nan Roberts and Al Gendron cross paths. It is the human need to draw lines in the sand. We drift your gaze to the sheriff's cruiser. Inside sits Deputy John LaPointe. He is not watching for speeders. He is trapped in the amber of a lost moment, staring at a photograph of Sally Ratcliffe. She has moved on to a new engagement, but John remains suspended in the grief of the what if. This pervasive melancholy, this inability to let go, is the soil in which darkness takes root. The town is a web of these silent stories. There is the class resentment between the janitor, Eddie Warburton, and the mechanic Sonny Jacket, a feud born of a broken Honda and a hefty bill. There is the quiet desperation of Myrtle Keaton and the loneliness of the stuttering boy, Slopey Dodd. But Castle Rock carries heavier ghosts than these. The collective memory here is stained by the violence of Frank Dodd, the rabid terror of the Cujo dog, and the mysterious death of the miser Pop Merrill. The town creates a veneer of normalcy, insisting that he will get over it, or she will learn to live with it. But trauma never truly leaves the soil. And now, the barometer is dropping. There is a storefront with soaped-over windows and a green canopy. Needful Things. It sits like a dormant predator. And there, walking his bicycle, is a boy named Brian Rusk, lost in a daydream. He is the unsuspecting key. The ordinary aggravations, the religious squabbles, the heartbreaks, the grudges, are merely dry tinder. A storm is coming to the Rock, and the shop is the spark. Chapter 1. In the ecosystem of a small town like Castle Rock, boredom is the soil in which gossip grows best. The arrival of a new business is never just commercial. It is an event, dissected and analyzed by the local gatekeepers of information. For 11-year-old Brian Rusk, the opening of the store in the old Realty building was interesting, but for his mother, Cora, it was a psychological lifeline. Cora was a woman who consumed television dramas and high-calorie snacks with equal fervor, and she viewed the soaped-over windows of the new shop with deep suspicion. It's important to understand the texture of this town. It is a place where privacy is scarce, and change is viewed as a threat until proven otherwise. The sign in the window, attached by a simple suction cup, read, "Needful Things," a curious name. Not useful things or wanted things, but needful. It implies a dependency, a void that requires filling. It promises not just goods, but a resolution to a craving. Cora Rusk dismissed it to her friend Myra as likely another junk shop for tourists, peddling fake antiques. But her dismissal was a defense mechanism. She was dying to know what was behind that glass. Brian, however, was preoccupied with his own internal world. He was a boy marked by the self-consciousness of a corrected hair lip and a crushing, desperate love for his speech therapist, Miss Ratcliffe. There is a tragedy in the loves of 11-year-old boys. They are absolute, consuming, and entirely invisible to the world. Brian lived in a daydream of protecting Miss Ratcliffe, of being seen by her not as a patient, but as a hero. But reality has a way of shattering such fragile fantasies. One afternoon, lost in a vision of taking his teacher to the fair, Brian nearly wandered into the path of a truck driven by Hugh Priest. Priest, a man simmering with the kind of low-grade alcoholic rage that often festers in towns like this, threatened the boy. It was a cold splash of reality. Brian was just a kid, small and powerless. This vulnerability is crucial. When we look at who falls into the web of needful things, it is rarely the content and the secure. It is the dreamers, the lonely, and the incomplete. On Tuesday, the day before the grand opening, Brian noticed a change. The sign didn't say "opening soon." It simply said "open." The windows were still opaque. The shade was drawn. It looked closed. A rational mind would walk away, assuming a mistake. But curiosity is a powerful trap. Brian, fearing he might miss a secret, stepped out of the October chill and into the shade of the green, sophisticated awning that seemed too grand for Castle Rock. He turned the knob. It opened. The interior was a study in disorientation. It was dimly lit by track lighting, the floor hushed by thick burgundy carpet. It felt less like a retail store and more like a church or a shrine. The display cases were mostly empty, heightening the allure of the few items that were present. Then the proprietor appeared. Leland Gaunt. Gaunt is a masterpiece of chameleon-like presentation. To Brian, he appeared tall, perhaps impossibly so, wearing a velvet smoking jacket. But it was his eyes that mattered. They were the same stormy blue as Miss Ratcliffe's. This is the first psychological trick of the devil. He doesn't look like a monster. He looks like familiarity. He looks like comfort. Gaunt welcomed Brian with a charm that was smooth, perhaps a little too smooth, like polished stone. He treated Brian not as a child, but as a young man, a subtle ego stroke that disarmed the boy immediately. Gaunt claimed he was from Akron, but his mannerisms were old world, timeless. He engaged Brian, creating a conspiracy of two. He suggested Brian could be his advertising, spreading the word to his mother. He was weaving the boy into the mechanism of the store before a single transaction had occurred. They toured the sparse inventory, a picture of Elvis, a pipe, and a splinter of wood. When Brian looked at the wood, Gaunt unlocked the case. He placed the object in Brian's hand. Here, the narrative shifts from the mundane to the supernatural, but it does so through sensory hallucination. Gaunt claimed the wood was from Noah's Ark, a piece of petrified history from the Borum Mountains. As Brian closed his fist around the splinter, reality warped. He wasn't just holding wood, he was experiencing it. He felt the sway of a massive boat, heard the lowing of animals, smelled the wet fur and the ancient rain. This is the true currency of needful things. Gaunt isn't selling objects. He is selling experiences, memories, and sensory transportation. He offers an escape from the mundane world of Castle Rock into something mythic. Brian was intoxicated by the sensation. When he opened his eyes, the shop felt distant, the connection to Gaunt intense. Gaunt, observing the boy's wonder with a predator's patience, finally asked the ultimate question: "What do you want more than anything else?" Brian didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for world peace or a new bike. He asked for a baseball card, specifically a 1956 Sandy Koufax. To an outsider, this is just cardboard. To Brian, whose father collected cards, it was the holy grail. It represented connection to his dad, status, and the possession of perfection. Gaunt, of course, had it. He went into the back, a space that sounded vast and filled with shuffling boxes, and returned with a shoebox. He flipped through cards of legendary players, casual treasures that would make a collector weep, until he produced the Koufax. But it wasn't just the card, it was signed. To my good friend Brian, with best wishes, Sandy Koufax. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. It is one thing to own a rare item. It is another to own an item that proves the universe knew you were coming. The inscription validated Brian's existence. It bridged time. Holding it, Brian fell into another trance, smelling the fresh-cut grass of Ebbets Field, hearing the crack of the bat. He was there. He mattered. Gaunt snapped him out of it. Now came the negotiation. The hook was set. Now the line had to be reeled in. Brian, possessed by desire, admitted he had no money. Gaunt, the benevolent uncle, hushed him. The price, he explained, was in 2 parts. The cash price was trivial, 85 cents, a pittance, a joke. This is a classic tactic. Make the material cost so low that the buyer feels they are getting away with robbery, distracting them from the true cost. The second part of the price was a deed. Gaunt asked if Brian knew a woman named Wilma Jerzyk. Brian did. She was a neighbor. Gaunt leaned in, his voice becoming a hypnotic rhythm, instructing Brian on a prank he was to pull on Wilma. Here is where the horror begins to curdle. As Gaunt spoke, Brian's memory began to fog. The specifics of the deed were planted deep in his subconscious, bypassing his moral filter. He was being programmed. The transaction was a deal with a devil who understands that the most effective chaos comes from turning neighbors against one another. Brian left the shop in a daze, the closed sign now facing the street. He had been inside for 20 minutes, yet it felt like hours. He stood on the sidewalk, the cognitive dissonance washing over him. He had the card, the precious, impossible card. But the memory of what he had promised to do in return was slippery, receding into the dark corners of his mind like a bad dream. He checked his pockets. The pennies were gone. The card was there. Brian Rusk mounted his bike and pedaled home, grinning wildly, clutching his treasure. He was the first domino to fall. He felt like a winner, unaware that in the economy of needful things, the buyer always pays with their soul, one small installment at a time. The game had begun in Castle Rock, and a heavy, unseen shadow was stretching out across the town, starting with the joyful heart of an 11-year-old boy. Chapter 2. In the grand sociology of small-town New England, the opening of a new business isn't just a commercial event. It is a ritualistic test of patience. Unlike the cities, where a new club might garner lines and paparazzi, places like Castle Rock operate on a code of aggressive apathy. It's a conservative Yankee mechanism, a social defense system. You don't show interest. You don't arrive first. To do so would be to admit a lack of self-sufficiency, and so usually a new shop sits empty for a polite duration, while the locals perform what we might call the dance of female investigation. It is a cold, stately gavotte of feigned disinterest. But Polly Chalmers has never been one for the gavotte. Polly is the outlier in Castle Rock's social equation. The town views her with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. She's the woman who left town pregnant at 18, returned years later with no baby, a mysterious past in San Francisco, and a crippling case of arthritis. She breaks the unwritten rules simply by existing. So naturally, she breaks the rule of the opening day. While the rest of the town watches from behind twitching curtains, Polly marches straight into Needful Things, carrying a devil's food cake. This moment is pivotal. It's the first time a major player steps onto the stage Leland Gaunt has set. Inside, the shop feels miraculously, suspiciously successful. The atmosphere isn't just welcoming, it's intoxicating. Polly, A woman usually grounded in sharp reality due to the constant grinding pain in her hands feels an immediate, uncharacteristic approval. But then she meets the proprietor, Leland Gaunt. When their eyes meet, Polly is struck by a profound sense of déjà vu. It's that disorienting psychological hiccup where the brain insists, "I know this man." But she doesn't. It's a trick of the mind, or perhaps a warning signal from the lizard brain that she ignores. The pain in her hands flares up, a brutal reminder of her mortality, but Gaunt doesn't flinch at her deformity. He bypasses the handshake, grasping her upper arm instead. It's a calculated move. He is instantly intimate, instantly accommodating, effectively bypassing her defenses. Note the predator's efficiency here. He identifies her weakness, her self-consciousness about her arthritic hands, and neutralizes it within seconds. He plays the role of the nervous newcomer perfectly, confiding in her about his stage fright. This is classic manipulation. By making himself vulnerable, he invites her to lower her guard. They share the cake, and the dynamic shifts. He isn't just being polite. He is mining her for data. He asks about the town, the people, the power structures. He records every name in a black notebook. He is building a dossier on his victims, and Polly, charmed and disarmed, is handing him the keys to the city. The shop itself is a psychological puzzle. It's a curio shop, in the loosest sense. The inventory is a chaotic mix of high-value antiques and dime store trash. A priceless Turkish rug hangs near a cheap picture of Elvis Presley. But the most unsettling detail, the one that should ring alarm bells, is the absence of price tags. When Polly asks about this, Gaunt reveals his philosophy, defining worth by need. This is the central thesis of the horrors to come. In a normal transaction, the market dictates the price. In Needful Things, the customer's obsession dictates the cost. It's a system designed to exploit the holes in people's souls. As Polly leaves, Gaunt's mask slips for a fraction of a second. Watching her walk away, his expression turns predatory. He whispers, "You'll do." It's a chilling confirmation that Polly isn't just a neighbor. She is a component in a machine he is building. With the ice broken by Polly, the dance of female investigation concludes and the floodgates open. The ladies of Castle Rock, Steffi, Cindy Rose and the rest, descend upon the shop. They come to judge, but they stay to be seduced. Gaunt works the room like a master conductor. He knows exactly what to say to whom. The interaction with Cindy Rose over a Lalique vase is a masterclass in psychological leverage. He doesn't just sell her a vase. He engages her in a game of dickering. He lets her believe she is outsmarting him, letting her beat him down on the price. He sells it to her for $31, a fraction of its worth. Why? Because the money is irrelevant. The transaction buys him something far more valuable, her trust, and the dopamine rush of a win. Cindy Rose leaves the shop not just with a vase, but with a sense of triumph. She is now chemically addicted to the feeling Leland Gaunt gives her. He has hooked her. And then we see the darker underbelly of the town's social web. Nettie Cobb enters. Nettie is the town's broken bird, timid, traumatized, a woman who flinches at loud noises and sudden movements. She is the housekeeper for Polly, a woman trying to rebuild a life shattered by a violent past. Gaunt zeroes in on her instantly. He separates her from the herd, speaking softly, praising the cake she baked. He finds her weakness, a desperate starvation-level need for kindness and validation. He offers her carnival glass, her specific obsession, and invites her back. He is grooming her. But the atmosphere shatters with the arrival of Wilma Jerzyk. If Nettie is the prey, Wilma is the brute force of nature. She enters wearing a casino night button, radiating aggression. Wilma is a bulldozer in human form, a woman who thrives on conflict. The mere sight of her sends Nettie into a panic. The tension between these two women is palpable, a hatred that goes back years. Gaunt watches this interaction, the terrified retreat of Nettie and the oblivious stomping dominance of Wilma. not with concern, but with scientific interest. He is identifying the fault lines in Castle Rock's geology. He sees that Nettie and Wilma are volatile elements just waiting for a spark. The chapter closes with a lingering, unsettling detail. As the ladies gossip about the handsome new shopkeeper, they can't seem to agree on the colour of his eyes. Cindy Rose thought they were grey. Francie thought they were green. This physical ambiguity is the final stamp of the supernatural. Leland Gaunt is a mirror. He reflects what you want to see, what you need to see. He is a blank canvas upon which the town of Castle Rock is about to paint its own destruction. The shop is open for business, and the currency is not cash. It is the hidden madness of ordinary people. Chapter 3. The night in Castle Rock has a way of peeling back the layers of a man's defences, and for Sheriff Alan Pangborn, the armour is wearing dangerously thin. We find him drifting down Main Street, piloting a 1986 Ford station wagon, the quintessential family car, now functioning as a solitary vessel for a man haunted by what he's lost. He's got a slight buzz from 3 beers, just enough to numb the edges, but not enough to silence the ghosts. As he rolls past the new shop Needful Things, Alan notes the aesthetic. A classy green canopy, a touch of elegance amidst the false fronts of the town. To him it doesn't look like a junk shop. It reminds him of a romantic French bistro, the kind of place you'd take a woman you intend to woo. It's interesting how the shop projects a different face to everyone who looks at it, isn't it? A mirror reflecting the viewer's deepest, often subconscious desires. But the pleasantry is fleeting. As Alan pulls into the municipal building, parking beside Norris Ridgwick's sad little Beetle, the darkness waiting in his mind pounces. This is the insidious nature of grief that King captures so viscerally. It's not a constant rain, but a predator that circles, waiting for the campfire to die down. Alan sits in the station wagon, and the voice begins to speak. We all have this voice, the internal saboteur, but Alan's is particularly cruel. It gleefully reminds him that his wife Annie and son Todd are still dead. It drags up the most mundane, painful regrets, like the time he yelled at Todd for spilling a milkshake on the seat. And in a moment of pure cinematic horror, Alan reaches into the glove compartment and his hand closes around a tangible artifact of that pain, a peanut brittle can. It's a snake in a nut can prank, a gag Todd bought at a novelty shop. The memory washes over Alan, not just of the toy, but of his own reluctance to buy it, his wife's gentle insistence on letting the boy have his fun, and the crushing reality that shortly after they were gone. He opens the can. The spring-loaded snake jumps out. It's a cheap jump scare, but for Alan, it's a psychological frag grenade. He weeps, exhausted. It's a profound observation on loss. You think you've cleaned out the house of your life, but there's always one more item, one more forgotten toy to drag you back to the funeral. He manages to compose himself, shoving the snake back in. He can't throw it away, not yet. The voice in his head shifts targets, whispering about his relationship with Polly Chalmers, suggesting he was too busy with town business, like the Thad Beaumont case, to save his family. It's a lie, but depression feeds on revisionist history. Alan steps out and notices a massive red Cadillac parked in the handicap spot. The license plate reads Keaton 1. This belongs to Danforth Buster Keaton, the head selectman. This car represents the petty corruption of small-town power, a man who believes the rules are for other people. Inside the station, the atmosphere is mundane, almost comically so. Sheila is reading a magazine. Norris Ridgwick is wrestling with a typewriter, agonizing over every key press. It's a scene of bureaucratic purgatory. Alan, nursing a headache and a heartache, decides to use the machinery of the law to strike back at the chaos. He orders a terrified Norris to ticket Keaton's Cadillac. Norris is paralyzed by the request. He knows Keaton's temper. But Alan plays the game of leverage, offering Norris the new radar gun and fax machine the department needs. It's a small transaction, a trade of safety for equipment, mirroring the larger, darker transactions happening down the street. Alan is forcing Norris to grow a spine, but he's also projecting his own need for control onto a parking violation. Alan retreats to his office and calls Polly. Immediately, he hears the slur in her voice, the telltale sign of Percodan. She's in agony. Her arthritis is a living thing, chewing on her hands. They share a tender, tragic conversation. They are two wounded people trying to support each other without breaking. Polly mentions she visited Needful Things and met the owner, Leland Gaunt. Here is a crucial detail for the law. Polly describes Gaunt as having gorgeous hazel eyes that made her heart flutter. Keep that in mind. She also mentions that Nettie Cobb, a fragile woman with a dark past involving a meat fork and an abusive husband, was entranced by the shop's carnival glass. Even more ominous, Wilma Jerzyk, the neighborhood bully who terrorizes Nettie, was seen there. The board is being set. The pieces are moving into place. After the call, Alan engages in a small, private ritual. He makes shadow puppets on the wall, a rabbit, an elephant. It's a meditative act, a way to focus on something other than the pain. But even here, the darkness encroaches. He makes a shadow Norris and a shadow Buster Keaton. He writes in his notebook to check out Leland Gaunt from Akron. Or was it Cleveland? His memory wavers. The shadow of the shop is already stretching over the sheriff's mind. Meanwhile, Polly tries to hang up the phone and drops it. The simple act of retrieving it sends a bolt of agony through her that leaves her weeping. We see the sheer physical torture she lives with, the vulnerability that makes her and everyone in this town ripe for the picking. Cut to the rain-slicked streets and Hugh Priest. Hugh is the town drunk, a man whose life is a series of fumbles and failures. He's walking because he's lost his license, seething with resentment toward the bartender who cut him off. He passes Needful Things, and here the trap springs. In the window, Hugh sees a foxtail, not just any piece of fur, but a totem of his lost youth. It triggers a vivid flashback to 1955, the best day of his life, driving a convertible, feeling young and full of potential. King masterfully deconstructs the power of nostalgia here. The shop doesn't just sell objects, it sells the promise of a timeline where things didn't go wrong. Hugh believes that if he buys this foxtail, he can restart his life. He can go to AA, he can get sober. It's a delusion, of course, but a potent one. The door is open. Hugh walks in. Leland Gaunt is there, dusting, and notice the description. Hugh sees eyes as black as an Indian's. Remember Polly saw Hazel? Gaunt is a chameleon. He presents the face you trust, the face you need. He engages Hugh, and the seduction is effortless. Hugh tries to pay with pocket lint and loose change. Gaunt makes the coins vanish, a magician's trick or something more. Gaunt refuses the money. He tells Hugh that wallets are for fools. He wants something else. He wants a favor. He asks about Nettie Cobb. The web tightens. Hugh is being enlisted as a soldier in a war he doesn't understand, bought for the price of a ragged piece of fur and a memory of 1955. Finally, we shift to the perspective of young Brian Rusk. He is trapped in a nightmare, a tangled mess of prepubescent sexuality and guilt. He dreams of his speech therapist and the terrifying Wilma Jerzyk. The dream is shameful, confusing and vivid, symbolizing the loss of innocence that comes with his new possession. Brian wakes up sweating. He has to check. He goes to his dresser, to his binder of baseball cards, and there it is, the Sandy Koufax, 1956, signed, "To my good friend Brian." This is the tragedy of the deal. Brian has the ultimate treasure, the holy grail of baseball cards, but he realizes with a sinking heart that he can never show it to anyone, not his dad, not his friends. The questions about where he got it and how much he paid would be impossible to answer. The needful thing isolates the victim. It creates a secret that walls them off from the rest of the world. Brian gloats over the card in the dark, a small golem with his ring. He knows he has a debt to pay to Mr. Gaunt, a prank to pull. He tells himself it's harmless, just a joke. But deep down, the corruption has already begun. He goes back to sleep, clutching his secret, while outside the wind howls and the town of Castle Rock sleeps, unaware that the game has officially begun. Chapter 4. The storm outside had passed, leaving Castle Rock under a fragile, breaking sky. But inside the hearts of its residents, the barometer was dropping fast. By mid-morning on Thursday, the air was thick with that peculiar, heavy silence that comes before a different kind of thunder. From the window of her shop, You So and So, Polly Chalmers watched the street. She wasn't just looking, she was witnessing. Small towns are like living organisms. The eyes in the windows are the nerve endings, and nothing goes unnoticed. She saw Nettie Cobb. Nettie, whose mind was a cracked teacup held together by sheer force of will, was moving down the street with a terrified, jerky rhythm. She clutched her umbrella not as a shield against the rain, but as a weapon against a world she didn't understand. There is a specific kind of bravery in the broken. Nettie was terrified of Leland Gaunt's shop, behaving as if the storefront were a dragon's maw. Polly and her friend Rosalie watched this internal war play out on the sidewalk. They saw Nettie reach for the door, recoil, and wrestle with her own demons. It's painful to watch someone fight a battle you can't help them with. But then, a shift. A smile that didn't belong to the situation. A smile that suggested an invisible hand had just smoothed out the panic. Nettie Cobb walked in. Polly and Rosalie cheered, unaware that they were cheering a moth flying directly into a bug zapper. They thought it was a breakthrough. In reality, it was the first turn of a screw. Inside the shop, the atmosphere shifted from the damp reality of Maine to the velvet-draped timelessness of Gaunt's web. Nettie Cobb was no longer the frightened mouse. She was entranced. She sat with Gaunt, hand in hand, like lovers or conspirators. She had purchased a carnival glass lampshade. To you or me, it's just glass. To Nettie, it was the missing piece of her soul, a colourful talisman against the drab misery of her life. She had paid cash, but we know by now that cash is the least expensive part of any transaction in Needful things. Gaunt, playing the role of the kindly confessor, leaned in. He touched her. There is something deeply violation-like about Gaunt's tactile nature. He handles his customers like he handles his antiques, assessing their fragility, looking for the cracks. He proposed a deed, a prank on Buster Keaton, the town's head selectman. Now consider the precision of this. Gaunt didn't pick a random target. He chose Keaton, a man whose sanity was already fraying at the edges, a man known for his paranoia. He was handing a match to a woman who didn't know she was holding dynamite. Nettie, blinded by the lampshade and Gaunt's hypnotic charm, agreed. She viewed it through the lens of innocent mischief, a way to reclaim the playfulness stripped from her by an abusive past. She didn't see the cruelty, she only saw the glass. When Nettie left the shop, the transformation was absolute. Polly, watching from across the street, noted the change instantly. The fear was gone, replaced by a floating, dreamlike state. Polly, with a flash of intuitive dark humour, compared it to sexual satisfaction, the look of a woman who has been thoroughly satisfied. It was a joke between friends, but the psychological subtext was dead on. Gaunt doesn't just sell items, he penetrates the psyche. He provides a release of tension that is almost biological. Nettie floated away, clutching her prize and the seeds of her own destruction. Meanwhile, the rot was spreading to the sheriff's office. Deputy Norris Ridgwick, a man of simple pleasures and a nervous stomach, was having a good day until he walked into the men's room. There, he found Buster Keaton. Keaton is a study in small-town power, corrupted by insecurity. He attacked Norris, physically slammed him against the wall, over a parking ticket. This wasn't just anger, it was the erratic, explosive violence of a pressurized tank. Keaton was screaming about persecution. In his mind, a $5 ticket wasn't a penalty, it was a conspiracy. This is where Stephen King excels at dismantling the facade of authority. We see Keaton not as a leader, but as a terrified, sweaty bully. When Sheriff Alan Pangborn intervened, the dynamic shifted. Alan, the voice of reason, tried to de-escalate, tearing up the ticket to soothe the beast. But even as he did it, he sensed something rancid emanating from Keaton. It wasn't just rage, it was fear. Keaton was acting like a cornered animal, seeing enemies in the shadows, believing the town was out to get him. Alan stood his ground, drawing a line in the sand. Politics only go so far. But as Keaton stormed out, leaving a half-chewed cigar and a cloud of menace, the sheriff was left with the unsettling realization that the town's leadership was mentally checking out. But Alan's headache was just beginning. No sooner had the political madness left than the religious madness walked in. The Reverend William Rose. Rose is the flip side of the Keaton coin. Where Keaton is paranoid, Rose is fanatical. He came to demand the cancellation of Casino Night, a harmless Catholic fundraiser, citing obscure laws and biblical wrath. Alan, exhausted, tried to explain the difference between morality and legality, but you cannot argue logic with a man who believes he is the mouthpiece of God. Rose left with a slam of the door, his eyes burning with the scary light of the true believer. Alan sat in the silence of his office, rubbing his temples. The town's pillars, government and religion, were cracking. He jokingly asked for hard drugs, but the humor was thin. He could feel the tension tightening, a physical weight in the air. While the adults postured and threatened, the corruption trickled down to the children. Brian Rusk, the boy who just wanted a Sandy Koufax card, was on his bike, pedaling toward a destiny he didn't want. It was Thursday, his day for the deed. Brian's internal monologue here is heartbreaking. He's a good kid, caught in a nightmare. He tried to rationalize what he was about to do, a prank on Wilma Jerzyk, but the image of Leland Gaunt haunted him. In Brian's mind, Gaunt had morphed into a monster, a hangman, who would destroy his family if he didn't pay up. This is the terror of childhood, the belief that the adult world has absolute crushing power over you. Brian reached the Jerzyk house. It was empty. The backyard was a domestic still life, a garden turning to winter mush, and pristine white sheets flapping on the clothesline. White sheets. Innocence. Purity. The psychological pressure on Brian snapped. He didn't just throw mud. He attacked the cleanliness. He grabbed handfuls of muck and hurled them at the laundry. It was a frenzy, a desecration. For a moment, the act of destruction felt good, a release of the fear Gaunt had planted in him. But as he rode away, washing the mud from his trembling hands, the guilt crashed down. He was no longer just a boy with a baseball card. He was a vandal, a sinner. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. He went home, snapped at his little brother, and hid in his room, the weight of his secret isolating him from the people he loved. And then there was Myra Evans. If Brian's motivation was fear, Myra's was envy. She had seen the picture of Elvis in the window of Needful Things, but more importantly, she knew her friend Cora wanted it. The desire wasn't just to have the object, it was to deny it to someone else. This is the ugliness of consumerism weaponized by Gaunt. Myra scurried into the shop, desperate, devoid of pride, and inside, Gaunt gave her exactly what she craved, but he twisted it into something grotesque. The narrative takes a surreal, hallucinatory turn here. Myra, clutching the photograph, didn't just see a picture. She experienced a full sensory delusion. She was on stage with the king. But this wasn't a romantic dream. It was a sweaty, overwhelming, hypersexualized fantasy. The description is visceral. The smell of sweat and English leather, the grind of hips, the roar of the crowd. Myra was lost in a dopamine flood so potent it reduced her to a quivering mess in Gaunt's chair. It creates a stark, horrifying image. A middle-aged woman in a quiet shop having an orgasmic breakdown over a piece of paper, while Leland Gaunt watches with cold, clinical detachment. He is not a participant. He is a scientist observing a rat pressing the pleasure lever until it starves. When he snapped her out of it, he was cruel. He stripped away her dignity, mocking her, making her beg. He drove the price up, not because he needed the money, but to see how low she would go. He humiliated her, forcing her to confront the depths of her own obsession. She was willing to pay anything, do anything. And the price? $140. And a prank. Gaunt directed her attention to Henry Beaufort, the owner of the local bar, the Mellow Tiger. Myra, shaking, sweaty and spiritually hollowed out, agreed. She would do it. She would do anything to get back to that stage with Elvis. As the chapter closes, Gaunt is smiling. The web is woven. Nettie is targeting Buster. Buster is targeting Norris. Brian has struck at Wilma. Myra is aiming for Henry. The lines of tension are drawn tight across Castle Rock, crossing and intersecting, waiting for the slightest vibration to set the whole town ringing with chaos. The storm overhead had cleared, but down on the streets the real storm was just beginning to gather force, and the forecast was entirely man-made. Chapter 5. We begin this chapter by sliding into a booth at Nan's luncheonette, joining Sheriff Alan Pangborn and Polly Chalmers. But the atmosphere isn't romantic. It's heavy with the unspoken weight of chronic pain. Alan notices the shine in Polly's eyes, a glazy brightness that betrays the agony she's hiding. He suspects she's taken a Percodan, a narcotic she rarely touches. It's a dark psychological reality of chronic illness. The fear of addiction becomes a secondary problem to the overwhelming necessity of just getting through the day. Polly is suffering, and Alan can only watch, helpless. The conversation shifts to Nan Roberts, the owner of the luncheonette. Stephen King paints Nan as a masterclass in small-town hypocrisy. On the surface, she's mom and apple pie, busty and sweet. But underneath, she's a calculator with a heart made of account books. She's wearing a button protesting the upcoming casino night, a slot machine with a red slash through it. Nan is the wealthiest woman in town now that Pop Merrill is dead, and she wields her Baptist morality like a cudgel. Alan, with his policeman's cynicism, compares her to a violent brothel madam he once knew. It's a perfect observation of Castle Rock's duality, the smiling face offering coffee and the ruthless predator counting coins behind the eyes. Polly tries to distract herself from her throbbing hands by recounting her visit to Needful things. She mentions how the shop owner, Leland Gaunt, sold Nettie Cobb a piece of carnival glass that transformed the poor woman's demeanor from sallow depression to rosy joy. But here is where the web tightens. Polly reveals she received a note from Mr. Gaunt. The note is written in copperplate, an antique script that screams of a bygone era. Gaunt invites Polly to the shop on Sunday to see a specific item, a knick-knack, that he claims calls out to her. This is Gaunt's modus operandi. He identifies the void in a person's soul and promises to fill it. For Polly, he hints at a cure, or at least a distraction, from her pain. But the conversation takes a darker turn as they discuss town politics and the mental state of Selectman Danforth Keaton. Polly drops a massive piece of law here, acting as the town historian. She reveals that insanity runs in Keaton's bloodline like a dark river. His uncle died catatonic at the Juniper Hill Asylum. His father had a breakdown. A great-aunt committed suicide. This isn't just gossip, it's foreshadowing. In King's world, madness is often a family heirloom, and Danforth Keaton is next in line to inherit the estate. As Polly leaves to nurse her pain in solitude, Avoiding Alan's company to hide her misery, we see the isolation that Gaunt exploits. Pain isolates Polly. Suspicion isolates Alan. The cracks are widening. We then cut to the sad, grimy existence of Hugh Priest. Hugh is a man defined by his vices and now by his obsession. He has the foxtail he bought from Gaunt, but the joy of ownership has instantly curdled into paranoia. This is a profound psychological insight into materialism. The object you own eventually owns you. Hugh originally fantasized about flying the foxtail on his car antenna, a symbol of his restored youth. But now, in the dim light of his messy home, fear takes over. He imagines light-fingered kids stealing it. He hallucinates a scenario where a teenager rips his treasure away. The joy of the object is replaced by the terror of losing it. So, instead of displaying it, he locks it in a closet. He drinks cheap whiskey to numb the anxiety, deciding that hiding his prize is the only way to keep it safe. As the alcohol takes hold, Hugh remembers the price he has to pay. Gaunt doesn't take cash, he takes deeds. Hugh recalls he has a prank to pull on Nettie Cobb. In his drunken stupor, he views this malice as a reasonable exchange. He passes out, a man imprisoned by the very thing he thought would set him free. The scene shifts to Wilma Jerzyk, a woman who treats life as a contact sport. Wilma is a domestic tyrant, bullying her husband Pete into submission. She returns home from work ready for a fight, disappointed when Pete accidentally gives her no reason to scream. But the universe, or perhaps Leland Gaunt, provides a target soon enough. Wilma goes outside to collect her laundry and stumbles into a nightmare. Her clean sheets are gone, replaced by heavy, sodden shapes. She's physically assaulted by a wet, flapping sheet in the dark, an experience King describes with visceral revulsion. It feels like a cold, slimy hand grabbing her. When the lights come on, the horror is revealed. Someone has pelted her laundry with mud. Wilma's reaction is instantaneous and feral. She doesn't look for evidence. She looks for a scapegoat. Her mind snaps immediately to Nettie Cobb. Why? Because of a petty feud over Nettie's dog, Raider. Months ago, Wilma threatened to kill the dog if it didn't stop barking. In Wilma's aggressive worldview, this mudslinging is Nettie's retaliation. This is the genius of Gaunt's plan. He doesn't need to create new hatreds. He simply weaponizes the ones that already exist. Wilma stands in the yard screaming, terrified by the moment of vulnerability when the sheet touched her, and she converts that fear into pure, high-octane rage. She decides, without a shred of proof, that Nettie Cobb must pay. Across town, the innocent Nettie Cobb is sitting with her dog, Raider, and her new treasure, the carnival glass lampshade. She is fragile, a woman broken by a past institutionalization, clinging to her new object for stability. The phone rings. It's Wilma. The call is a psychological assault. Wilma screams accusations about the muddy sheets. Nettie, who is completely innocent of the prank, tries to defend herself, but her fear makes her sound guilty and frantic. She clutches the lampshade, her talisman against the dark. Wilma threatens her with a voice like an ice pick. "You won't see me coming." When the line goes dead, Nettie's fragility shatters. But it doesn't break into pieces. It sharpens into a weapon. We learn a terrifying detail from her internal monologue. She once stabbed her husband with a meat fork. The victim is actually a dormant killer. Terrified that Wilma will hurt her dog or take her lampshade, Nettie's mind retreats to that dark place. She promises Raider that she will protect him. If Wilma comes, she'll be sorry. Gaunt has successfully pitted the town bully against a woman with a history of homicidal defense. Finally, we meet Deputy Norris Ridgwick. Norris is having a terrible day. He's been humiliated by Selectman Keaton and physically ravaged by a bad chicken lunch that has left him with severe stomach cramps. He feels small, dirty, and tired. While patrolling, he stops in front of Needful things. In the window, he sees a Bazoon fishing rod. This isn't just a piece of tackle. It's a time machine. It triggers a wave of nostalgia for his dead father, bringing back memories of coffee in a red thermos and misty mornings on the lake. The grief hits him hard. He wants that rod because he wants his father back. Leland Gaunt appears in the doorway, sensing the weakness. He uses the oldest trick in the book, pretending to know Norris's name, reading his name tag, to establish intimacy. Norris tries to resist. He's on duty, but Gaunt is persuasive. He offers a deal that can't be refused. He lures Norris inside with the promise of reclaiming that lost childhood joy. The trap is set. Norris, driven by grief and a bad day, walks into the spider's web, believing he's just buying a fishing pole. But in Castle Rock, you never just buy things. You sell a piece of yourself. Chapter 6. Wilma Jerzyk wakes up that Friday with a terrifying kind of serenity. While she usually thrives on confrontation, always needing the last word and the first strike, today she decides on a psychological siege rather than a physical assault. She realizes that letting Nettie Cobb swing in the wind, paralyzed by the anticipation of Wilma's wrath, is far more satisfying than an immediate brawl. It's a classic predator tactic, savoring the fear before the kill. However, Wilma's unnatural calm isn't just a mood swing, it's chemical. Her husband, Pete, terrified of her explosive temper, has been secretly dosing her coffee with Xanax. King paints Pete not just as a henpecked husband, but as a survivor living at the base of an active volcano. He drugs her not out of malice, but out of sheer self-preservation. A desperate ritual to keep the great god Thunder Mountain from erupting and destroying his life. He's managed to subdue the beast for now, but the toxicity of their dynamic is palpable. Fueled by this drug-induced confidence, Wilma begins her patrol. She drives her Yugo past Nettie's house repeatedly, honking and slowing down, playing a sadistic game of peekaboo. She sees the curtains twitch and revels in the knowledge that she is the architect of Nettie's nightmare. Inside the house, Nettie Cobb is fracturing. The psychological pressure Wilma applies acts like a corrosive acid on Nettie's fragile sanity. Clutching her prized carnival glass lampshade, her symbol of beauty and stability, Nettie tries to hide it in an armoire in the shed to keep it safe from Wilma. But here, King vividly illustrates the spiral of obsessive-compulsive anxiety caused by trauma. Nettie tries to leave for work at Polly's, but she becomes trapped in a loop of checking the locks. She checks the front door, then the shed, then the armoire over and over, unable to trust her own senses. The paranoia becomes a physical weight. Every shadow looks like Wilma. Every ring of the telephone sounds like a threat. The tragedy here is Nettie's isolation. She calls Polly to call in sick, lying about a stomachache, masking the reality of her mental collapse. Polly, thinking she is being kind, tells her to rest, unknowingly leaving Nettie alone in the dark with her demons. The chapter ends on a chilling image of defensive psychosis. Nettie, unable to face the world, retreats to her living room chair in the gloom. She isn't just hiding anymore. She sits bolt upright, the fragile lampshade in her lap, and a butcher knife gripped tight in her hand. The frightened animal has been backed into a corner, and the suspense shifts from if violence will happen to simply when. Chapter 7. Friday, October 11th, marked the moment when curiosity in Castle Rock shifted into full-blown obsession. As paychecks hit pockets, the town's newest establishment, Needful Things, saw a surge of patrons that silenced the skeptics. The shop had evolved since its opening. The shelves were now teeming with items that seemed less like merchandise and more like physical manifestations of desire. We see a darker texture to the inventory now. There were crystal chess sets carved into African predators, black pearl necklaces that induced a strange melancholy in those who gazed upon them, and a locked music box that promised a tune no one could quite remember. It's classic King misdirection. The items are beautiful, but they carry a psychic weight. Gaunt even posted a new sign, caveat emptor, buyer beware. It's a joke the devil makes to your face, telling you exactly what's happening, knowing you're too enthralled to care. When a customer asked about the sign, Gaunt's reply was sharp. If you buy a pig in a poke, you keep the pig. He isn't just selling antiques, he is selling consequences. The transactions that day were numerous, but a few stand out as pivotal gears in the machine Gaunt is building. Sally Ratcliffe, the speech teacher and a devout Baptist, was drawn to a splinter of wood labelled as petrified wood from the Holy Land. For a woman whose life is defined by religious structure and a button that proclaims "I'm one of the saved," this item was irresistible. The price? $17, and a promise to play a prank on Frank Jewett, the school principal. Sally left the shop in a daze, floating on a cloud of pious satisfaction, unaware she had just agreed to light a fuse. Then came Cora Rusk, desperate for a picture of Elvis Presley she'd seen earlier. When Gaunt told her it had been sold to an out-of-stater, he triggered a specific kind of small-town rage, territorial jealousy. But Gaunt, the master manipulator, offered a consolation prize, a pair of aviator sunglasses, allegedly worn by the king himself. Cora was instantly ensnared. Here we see Gaunt's true objective. He doesn't need $19.50 from Cora. He needs eyes on the street. He asked her to identify a man watching the shop from across the road. It was Sheriff Alan Pangborn. Gaunt knows that Pangborn is the tough sell, the one man with the detective's intuition to see through the glamour. Gaunt needed a spy to watch the sheriff, but he rejected Cora's suggestions of Polly Chalmers or the dispatcher, knowing they were too close to Alan. Instead, he settled on Eddie Warburton, the janitor. In the narrative archetype of the fifth business, a term Gaunt actually uses, the janitor is the perfect invisible player, essential to the plot, but unnoticed by the heroes. Gaunt sealed the deal with a kiss on Cora's cheek that she found physically repulsive, burning like a fever, yet she was too drugged by the sunglasses to refuse. The web grew more tangled. Cindy Rose Martin was manipulated into buying a Lalique vase to match one she already owned, priced cheaply, in exchange for a prank on Deputy Norris Ridgwick. The harmless Slopey Dodd bought a teapot for his mother, paying with a promise to prank Sally Ratcliffe's boyfriend. You see the pattern? Gaunt is cross-wiring the town. Person A pranks person B, person C pranks person D. When the explosions start, no one will look at the shopkeeper. They will look at their neighbours. By the time Gaunt flipped the sign to closed, he was exhausted but satisfied. He had successfully planted the seeds of chaos while identifying his primary antagonist, Sheriff Pangborn. We then shift perspective to that very antagonist, Alan Pangborn, entering a scene of deceptive domestic tranquility at Polly Chalmers' house. This section is crucial because it contrasts the cold manipulation of the shop with the warm, albeit pained reality of human connection. Polly was waiting for him, wearing gloves inside the house, a subtle, heartbreaking signal that her arthritis was flaring up. Alan, ever the cop, noticed the small details, the way she used her teeth to remove the gloves, the grimace when she lifted a plate. He knew she was in agony, and he knew she was lying about it. But Alan also realized she was lying about something else. Her past. Polly claimed her son, Kelton, died of SIDS years ago in Denver. Alan's internal lie detector, honed by years of police work, told him this was a fabrication. But unlike the malicious lies spreading through town, he viewed Polly's deception with patience. He loved her enough to wait for the truth. Their evening was a dance of intimacy and avoidance. They discussed Alan's son, Al, who was pulling away from his father, retreating to boarding school and friends on the Cape. Polly feared Al saw her as the wicked stepmother, but Alan reassured her. The boy was grieving the loss of his mother and brother, and Castle Rock held too many ghosts. This conversation triggered a shift in the atmosphere. Alan performed a simple sleight-of-hand magic trick with a coin, a skill he was known for, and suddenly the mood moved from domestic comfort to raw, visceral need. Polly, perhaps driven by the pain in her hands and the desire to escape her own body, initiated a frantic, powerful sexual encounter in the kitchen. It wasn't just lovemaking, it was an exorcism of pain. For a brief hour, the endorphins washed away her arthritis, and the solitude washed away Alan's grief. But sleep brings its own demons. While Polly drifted off, Alan lay awake, haunted by the past that Needful Things was threatening to dig up. King takes us deep into Alan's psychology here, explaining the black hole in his life. We learn the full tragic backstory of his late wife, Annie, and their son, Todd. They died in a car crash, but the details have never sat right with Alan. Before the accident, he had found a massive bottle of aspirin emptied in a week. Annie had lied about it. After the crash, the autopsy revealed a brain tumor. The horror for Alan isn't just the death, it's the ambiguity. Annie had been driving without a seatbelt, something she never did, while their son Todd was buckled in. Alan has been tortured by a single nightmarish question. Did the tumor make her crazy? Did she commit suicide and take their son with her? Or worse, did she try to take Todd, and did the boy struggle? This is the psychological suspense that elevates the story above simple horror. Alan is a man who deals in facts and evidence, but the most important event in his life is an unsolvable mystery. He recalled a pivotal moment when he had confessed these dark suspicions to Polly. She had been the one to pull him back from the brink of insanity. With cold, hard logic, she had forced him to admit that Todd hadn't seemed afraid of his mother, that Annie hadn't shown signs of psychosis. She deconstructed his murder-suicide theory, framing the tragedy as exactly that, a tragic accident caused by a medical event. She saved his sanity by refusing to let him wallow in guilt. Back in the present, lying next to the woman who saved him, Alan's mind drifted into a nightmare. He found himself in a surreal version of a department store called Ennsville. The proprietor wasn't Gaunt, but George Stark, the villainous alter ego from King's The Dark Half, referencing the trauma Alan suffered during that previous investigation. In the dream, a snake emerged from a computer, and every item Alan tried to purchase turned into the same horrifying object, the charred, melted belt buckle of his dead son. The chapter closes on this terrifying image. The contrast is stark. Outside, Leland Gaunt is selling dreams that turn into nightmares. Inside Alan's head, the nightmares are already free, waiting for the slightest push to consume him. The psychological stage is set. The town is armed with pranks, and the sheriff is wrestling with ghosts. Chapter 8. We begin this chapter by descending into the disintegrating mind of Danforth Keaton, Castle Rock's head selectman. If you've ever watched a man drowning in slow motion, you have an idea of Keaton's current state. He sits in his office early on a Saturday morning, not with a brain tumor, but with a headache that implies a spiritual rot. His desk is a battlefield of tax ledgers and threatening correspondence from the State of Maine Bureau of Taxation. The walls are closing in. Keaton is a man being crushed by the weight of his own embezzlement, but his mind, in a desperate attempt to protect its own ego, has concocted a shield of paranoia. He doesn't see his impending ruin as the consequence of theft. He sees it as the work of them, the persecutors. This is a classic psychological defense mechanism. Externalize the blame to avoid the crushing reality of guilt. He thinks of the revolver hidden in his closet at home, nestled beneath moth-eaten sweaters. He doesn't intend it for himself, but for his enemies. Keaton's paranoia is specific and venomous. He sorts through the tax letters, which are demanding an audit of everything: town tax records, revenue sharing, expense accounts. The audit is scheduled for October 17th, just 5 days away. The language of the bureaucracy feels like physical violence to him. In a fit of impotent rage, He scrawls childish obscenities across the files and hurls his pen across the room. He goes to the window, terrified that he is being watched. He speculates on who the chief persecutor might be. He suspects Deputy Norris Ridgwick or perhaps Sheriff Alan Pangborn. In Keaton's shattered worldview, Pangborn and Ridgwick are conspirators, the Lone Ranger and Tonto, out to destroy him. This is the tragic irony of the corrupt official. He believes the law enforcers are the criminals because they threaten his illegal sanctuary. King gives us a necessary flashback here to understand how Buster Keaton, a man once defined by his rigid black and white morality, fell into this grey abyss. It started years ago with a trip to Lewiston. Keaton had been a straight arrow, a man who never gambled, until a colleague, Steve Frazier, took him to the raceway. It wasn't the money that hooked him. It was the electricity, the sensory overload of the track. The smell of horses, the roar of the crowd, the announcer's voice woke up a dormant, reptilian part of his brain. He won big on a long shot named Absolutely that first night, and the dopamine hit was stronger than any drug. He had discovered a place where he felt truly alive, but as is often the case with addiction, the thing that makes you feel most alive is often the thing that kills you. Over the years, the innocent hobby metastasized into a compulsion, leading him to plunder the town's treasury to cover his losses. Back in the present, Keaton leaves his office, checking mirrors for hidden cameras, a symptom of his deepening psychosis. He wanders down Main Street and stops in front of the new shop, Needful Things. Despite the early hour, the sign says open. In the window, he sees a vintage board game called Winning Ticket. It depicts a horse race that looks uncannily like the track at Lewiston. It lures him in. Inside, we see Leland Gaunt at work, and it is a masterclass in manipulation. Gaunt doesn't sell products. He sells validation. He welcomes Keaton, serving him coffee and soothing his frazzled nerves. He shows Keaton the toy, a mechanical tin track from the 1930s, where different horses win at random. Gaunt explains that old-time gamblers used it like a Ouija board to predict winners. Gaunt proposes a wager on the toy horses, but notice the currency, not money, but a favor. This is the devil's contract. If Keaton wins, Gaunt owes him. If Gaunt wins, Keaton owes a favor. Keaton's horse wins. The hook is set. Gaunt tells him to take the toy, try it out, and if it works, they can talk about them, the persecutors. Gaunt validates Keaton's insanity, confirming that the town is indeed infested with enemies. He offers himself as an ally. Keaton pays with a $2 bill, a symbol of his first gambling win, and leaves, feeling understood for the first time in years. While Keaton falls into the trap, we shift perspective to the sheriff's office. Alan Pangborn is trying to keep things light, performing magic tricks for his skeptical deputy John LaPointe. There's a sharp contrast here. Alan uses sleight of hand to bring joy and amusement, whereas Gaunt uses magic to entrap and destroy. Alan mentions he wants to visit the new shopkeeper. We cut briefly to Gaunt, who is on the phone with Eddie Warburton, securing his loyalty. Then, Gaunt senses Alan approaching. The reaction is visceral. Gaunt looks through the window and feels an instant, deep-seated dislike for the sheriff. He perceives something dangerous in Alan's face, the look of a man who has seen the dark side of existence and survived. Gaunt fears exposure. Alan peers into the shop window, but the glass plays tricks on him, showing only his reflection. Finding the door locked and a "Gone to Portland" sign up, despite Gaunt being just on the other side, Alan slides a friendly welcome card under the door. Once Alan is gone, Gaunt picks up the card. He reads it, mocking the sheriff's offer of friendship. In a display of true supernatural power, Gaunt crumples the card, and blue fire spurts from his fingers, consuming the paper without leaving even ash. He vows to show the sheriff some real tricks. The battle lines are being drawn between the man of law and the agent of chaos. Meanwhile, the poison spreads to the Keaton household. Myrtle Keaton is worried about her husband, who has locked himself in his study. She drives to town for donuts to cheer him up, and spots a doll in the window of Needful Things, a doll that makes her slam on her brakes. The web is widening. The narrative then pivots to Polly Chalmers, sitting in her rocker, wrestling with her own demons. King uses physical pain as a metaphor for emotional secrets here. Polly's arthritis is flaring up, a bad spell heralded by a strange tingling in her hands. But her physical agony pales in comparison to her internal conflict. She knows she needs to tell Alan the truth about her past, but fear and pride hold her back. We delve into Polly's backstory, and it is tragic. As a young woman, she became pregnant by a boy named Duke, who abandoned her. Defying her parents' demand to hide the pregnancy, she ran away to San Francisco. She gave birth to a son, Kelton. She struggled in poverty, refusing to break, fueled by a fierce, stubborn pride. The tragedy struck when a fire in her apartment building killed Kelton while she was at work. The guilt is a heavy, suffocating blanket that she has worn ever since. She eventually reconciled with her parents before their deaths, but the ghost of her son remains. We are treated to a memory of Polly's great-aunt Evie, a wise, chain-smoking matriarch who saw through Polly's defenses. At Polly's parents' funeral, Aunt Evie delivered a crucial warning. Don't be a ghost. She recognized that Polly was haunting her own life, tethered to the dead. Evie told her that Castle Rock was where she belonged, but only if she could live there fully alive. In the present, Polly sits in the gathering twilight, paralyzed by the approaching pain in her hands and the fear of judgment. She loves Alan, but she guards the memory of her son and her own suffering with a ferocious possessiveness. When Alan calls to check on her, she lies, saying she is fine, while internally she is screaming. The isolation of the characters in this book is striking. Everyone is suffering alone, which makes them perfect prey for Gaunt. We end the chapter back with Danforth Keaton. He is no longer a rational man. He is a conduit for obsession. He has spent the entire day playing with the winning ticket racing game. He discovers that when he assigns the names of real horses to the tin figures, the game accurately predicts the winners of past derbies. Now, he turns to the current day's racing form for Lewiston. He runs the races on the toy. It predicts a long shot named Malabar for the final race. The air in the room is thick with manic energy. Keaton isn't just looking for money anymore. He's looking for salvation through chance. He locks the game away and rushes to his Cadillac, speeding toward the track, convinced he has found the solution to all his problems. He doesn't realize that by relying on the toy, he has surrendered his free will to Leland Gaunt. He thinks he's driving toward a jackpot, but he's actually accelerating toward his own destruction. Chapter 9. Sunday morning in Castle Rock usually brings a hush, a golden silence broken only by church bells. But for Nettie Cobb, silence is just a container for paranoia. It is 10:15, and Nettie is standing in her kitchen, armored in her coat, buttoning it with the grim determination of a soldier going over the top. She looks down at her dog, Raider. The little dog thumps his tail, unaware that he is witnessing his mistress's final descent into the machinations of Leland Gaunt. Nettie has a mission. She has baked a lasagna for Polly Chalmers, spinach and canned mushrooms, because fear kept her from the market, and she intends to deliver it. But her mind is a fractured landscape. She obsessively checks the mental inventory of her locks. The carnival glass lampshade is safe. The doors are secured. She terrifies herself with thoughts of Wilma Jerzyk, the crazy Polish woman she believes is holding her prisoner. To leave the house is an act of war against her own neuroses. She scratches her forearm with her house key until it bleeds, a sharp, stinging totem of reality to prove she really locked the door. This is the logic of the unraveling mind. Pain is the only trustworthy receipt for memory. With a red welt rising on her arm and the lasagna in hand, Nettie marches out, leaving Raider to guard a fortress that has already been breached by invisible enemies. Watching from the shadows of a stolen orange town truck is Hugh Priest. He is a man hollowed out by addiction, but his drug of choice isn't a powder or a needle. It is a foxtail he bought at Needful Things. As Nettie vanishes toward Polly's house, Hugh puts the truck in neutral and lets gravity pull him toward the scene of the crime. Meanwhile, Polly Chalmers is waking up in hell. This is the reality of chronic pain that King captures so viscerally, not just an ache, but a malicious, sentient presence. Her hands are gnarled claws, her body a network of poisoned wires. She is trapped in a drug daze, humiliatingly unable to even grasp her pain medication. When the doorbell rings, it is a torture. Nettie's arrival is a strange mercy. Despite her own fragility, Nettie becomes the caretaker. She ministers to Polly with thermal gloves, a placebo of heat and love. There is a tragic tenderness here. Nettie, who is barely holding on to sanity, anchors Polly, who is physically crumbling. They share coffee and the intimacy of the damaged, but the shadow of Leland Gaunt falls across the room. Nettie mentions she has to visit the shop again. Gaunt wants to see her. Polly, feeling the temporary relief of the gloves and the company, unwittingly seals the pact. She tells Nettie to have Gaunt call her. As Nettie leaves, the narrative delivers a gut punch of foreshadowing, the kind that hangs over the rest of the story like a shroud. That was the last time Polly would ever see her alive. Back at Nettie's house, the horror begins. Hugh Priest enters using a skeleton key. He is operating on dream logic, guided by a hallucination where his beloved foxtail spoke to him, demanding a sacrifice. He finds Raider, the little dog with the white bib. Hugh isn't naturally cruel, but obsession rewrites morality. He distracts the friendly animal, scratching its belly while he prepares a corkscrew. He pins a note to the corkscrew, a message Gaunt dictated about mud on clean sheets. Then, in a spasm of violence that sickens even him, he drives the corkscrew into the dog. Raider dies confused, betrayed by a human hand. Hugh flees the house, the adrenaline of the kill mixing with nausea. He sees a boy on a bike, Brian Rusk, but they pass like ghosts. Hugh retreats to his own home, and the moment he touches his foxtail, the guilt evaporates. This is the terrifying seduction of Needful Things. The object absorbs the sin. The boy on the bike, Brian Rusk, is also operating under the influence of a nightmare. He dreamed of baseball legend Sandy Koufax, but the hero's face morphed into the predatory visage of Leland Gaunt. In the dream, the baseballs bled, and the message was absolute. Mr. Gaunt knows best. This mantra is the psychological battering ram Gaunt uses to break the town's will. Brian is no longer a sweet kid. He is a soldier, conscripted by fear. He rides to the Jersey house, Wilma's house. His basket is heavy with stones and hate mail. Brian unleashes a storm of destruction. He hurls rocks through the picture window, the TV, the microwave. With every crash, the fear recedes, replaced by a dark, intoxicating power. He is destroying the sanctity of a home to protect his secret possession, the Sandy Koufax card. A neighbor, Mrs. Mislabursky, catches him but fails to intervene, dismissing the chaos as just another feud. Brian rides away, his innocence left amidst the shattered glass. He goes home to sleep, the corruption of his soul complete because he has accepted the lie. Mr. Gaunt knows best. Finally, the web tightens around Nettie Cobb. She arrives at Needful Things, expecting a reward, perhaps more glass. Instead, Gaunt feeds on her disorientation. He plays the benevolent father figure, soothing her anxieties while reprogramming her mind. He gives her a pad of fake traffic violation tickets and a roll of tape. His instructions are to target Buster Keaton. Cruelly, he hints that she doesn't need to worry about feeding Raider anymore, a dark joke that flies over her head. He commands her to banish the word "but" from her vocabulary. There is no room for hesitation in Gaunt's world. He forces her to repeat the mantra, Mr. Gaunt knows best. Nettie repeats it. Her eyes are open, but her will is gone. She takes the tickets and the tape, walking out into a sunlight that feels false, a puppet whose strings are being pulled by a demon in a cardigan. The board is set. The pieces are moving. And in the silence of Nettie's house, a dead dog lies on the floor, the first casualty of the war to come. Chapter 10. We begin in South Paris, a gritty mill town not far from Castle Rock, where the air usually carries the chemical stink of tanning mills. But inside a restaurant called Maurice, the atmosphere is deceptively elegant, masking the rotting reality of the marriage at the center of our story. Here sits Danforth Buster Keaton and his wife Myrtle. To understand the horror that is about to unfold, you have to look at the psychological architecture of this couple. Myrtle is living in a delusion of romantic resurgence. For months, she has been a non-entity to her husband, an object of verbal abuse and cold neglect. King paints a devastating portrait of emotional battery here. Not bruises on the skin, but the systematic dismantling of a person's self-worth until they believe they are the problem. Today, however, Buster is manic, affectionate, and sexually attentive. Myrtle believes her life is turning around. She is tragically mistaken. Buster's euphoria isn't love. It's the adrenaline of a gambling addict who just scored big. He's sitting on $18,000 from a winning streak at the track, money he plans to use to patch the holes he's embezzled from the town treasury. This is the classic hubris of the corrupt official. He believes he can manipulate the system, spin a story about a bad investment, and use the everyone does it defense to survive the encroaching audit. He feels invincible, floating on a cloud of narcissism, believing that Leland Gaunt, the man who sold him the relentless winning ticket game, is his savior. While Buster feeds his ego and his stomach, a mechanism of destruction is being wound up back in Castle Rock. Nettie Cobb, the fragile, doll-obsessed woman we've come to pity, is approaching the Keaton house. She is acting as Gaunt's unknowing agent of chaos. Her task seems simple: tape a series of prank notices around Buster's home. She believes it's a harmless joke on a grumpy man. She has no idea she is lighting a fuse connected to a powder keg of paranoia. Nettie's intrusion into the Keaton home is a masterclass in suspense. We have the intruder wandering through the private spaces of the victim, touching the lingerie, judging the housekeeping, while the homeowner races back. It's a collision course. Nettie, driven by the voice of Mr. Gaunt in her head, papers the house with pink slips. But as she works, the tension ratchets up. Buster drops Myrtle off early so he can catch a football game. Or so he says. In reality, he wants to avoid questions about his crimes. The timing is razor thin. Nettie is still inside, trapped by her own curiosity and fear, when Buster's Cadillac pulls into the garage. This is the stuff of nightmares. The trapped prey realizing the predator is home. Nettie barely escapes, fleeing out the front door just seconds before Buster walks in from the garage. Now we witness the psychological breakage. When Buster Keaton walks into his kitchen, he doesn't see a prank. His guilty conscience, burdened by months of theft and fear, filters reality through a lens of psychosis. He sees the pink slips, which Gaunt has customized with lethal precision, and his mind snaps. The notes don't just mock his driving, they scream his secrets. They accuse him of embezzlement, of sexual deviancy, of financial faggotry. To a sane man, this would be a malicious break-in. To Buster, who is already teetering on the edge, this is confirmation of the persecutors. This is the paranoia that has been eating at him, the belief that they are out to get him. He runs through his house, a manic sweating figure of absurdity and terror, ripping down the accusations. He is no longer a town selectman. He is a cornered animal, convinced that the authorities are mocking him before the kill. While Buster descends into madness, The second half of Gaunt's trap springs shut across town. Wilma Jerzyk returns home to find her sanctuary violated. Her windows are smashed, her expensive TV is a smoking ruin, and notes have been left behind. These notes are blunt instruments, warning her to back off. Wilma, a woman of volcanic temper and zero introspection, immediately identifies the culprit, Nettie Cobb. What's fascinating here is Wilma's reaction. Most people would feel fear or violation. Wilma feels a dark, homicidal joy. King shows us that Wilma is a creature of violence. She has been waiting for an excuse to unleash her true nature. She doesn't call the police. She goes to the kitchen, ignores the glass in her hand, and selects a carving knife. She is hunting. Simultaneously, Nettie Cobb returns to her own home, seeking safety. Instead, she finds a slaughter. This is the moment the story shifts from psychological tension to visceral tragedy. Nettie finds her dog Raider dead in the hallway. The brutality is specific and gruesome. Killed with a corkscrew. A note is spiked onto the weapon, mocking her. The death of the innocent animal is a trope King uses effectively to signal that there is no going back. The breaker of Nettie's mind trips. The fear evaporates, replaced by a cold, glittering rage. She arms herself with a meat cleaver. The stage is set for a collision on the corner of Willow and Ford Streets. It is a scene of grotesque absurdity and horror. The two women meet not with words, but with immediate, lethal intent. The fight is messy, desperate, and devoid of glory. It isn't a choreographed movie duel. It is two desperate people butchering each other in the street. Wilma stabs Nettie in the gut. Nettie buries the cleaver in Wilma's shoulder. The violence is described with unflinching anatomical detail, intestines spilling out, bones cracking. It is the physical manifestation of the town's spiritual rot. They collapse together in the gutter, entangled in a bloody embrace that looks almost like lovers. As the neighbors scream and faint, the two pawns of Leland Gaunt destroy one another. Wilma dies with a knife in her chest. Nettie dies from her wound shortly after, her last thought for her murdered dog. Gaunt has successfully removed two pieces from the board, creating a vacuum of chaos that will suck in the rest of the town. While the sirens begin to wail, signaling the end of Nettie and Wilma, we cut to the quiet, dusty atmosphere of Needful things. Polly Chalmers is walking to the shop, her hands crippled by arthritis. She meets Gaunt, who is the picture of solicitude. The contrast is jarring. Outside, blood is running in the gutters. Inside, Gaunt is quoting literature and offering tea and sympathy. He presents Polly with the azka, a silver amulet on a chain. He claims it is an ancient Egyptian charm for pain. But notice the sensory details King provides. The dusty, slithery sound coming from inside the silver ball. It suggests something dead, or perhaps something dormant and insectile waiting to wake up. Polly is skeptical, but pain is a powerful coercer. Gaunt plays on her desperation, slipping the chain over her head with a hypnotic, almost predatory gentleness. It's a seduction. As the amulet settles against her skin, she enters a trance-like state, a dissociation from reality. This is the pact being sealed. She feels relief, yes, but it comes with a hook. Gaunt warns her never to take it off, establishing a dependency. She's no longer just a customer, she is owned. As she leaves, the sirens wail in the distance, a warning she is too medicated by the amulet's magic to heed. Finally, we return to the Keaton house to close the circle of misery. Myrtle returns, her heart full of the morning's false promise. She expects the loving husband she left a few hours ago. Instead, she finds a house locked up tight and a husband who screams at her through a closed door. Buster has fully retreated into his fortress of paranoia. He is crouched in his study, guarding his embezzled cash and his winning ticket game, terrified of the world outside. Myrtle's dream of a happy marriage is crushed instantly. She retreats to her bedroom, clutching a doll, a poignant parallel to Nettie, who also sought comfort in dolls before her end. As Myrtle weeps, realizing she's more alone than ever, the chapter ends. The trap is sprung. 2 women are dead in the street. Polly has sold her soul for pain relief, and Buster Keaton is a loaded gun waiting to go off. The chaos has officially begun. Chapter 11. The clock ticked toward the death of Sunday, creeping up on midnight in the basement of Kennebec Valley Hospital. The heavy door to the morgue swung open, the sign warning against unauthorized entry flashing briefly before sealing the room's cold secrets back inside. Sheriff Alan Pangborn emerged, his posture heavy, shuffling in hospital slippers that whispered against the linoleum. He looked less like a lawman and more like a man haunting his own life, stripped of his cap, carrying the weight of what he had just witnessed. In the quiet hum of the corridor, a janitor worked a floor buffer, a rhythmic drone that felt hypnotic to Alan's exhausted mind. They exchanged weary pleasantries, the camaraderie of late-night workers surrounded by the institutional reality of sickness and death. Alan needed a cigarette more than he needed sleep, though the hospital rules forced him to the perimeter. He found an exit, a side door leading to the alley, and propped it open with a discarded medical gown. The night air hit him, crisp and cleansing, scrubbing the scent of formaldehyde and stale tragedy from his nostrils. But as the nicotine hit his system, offering that paradoxical mix of dizziness and clarity, Alan's mind refused to settle. The events of the day felt alien. Staring up at the light-polluted sky, unable to see the stars he loved, Alan entertained a grim fantasy that Martians had landed in Castle Rock. It was a psychological defense mechanism, a way for his rational policeman's brain to process the irrational brutality he had seen. If aliens had bitten Nettie Cobb and Wilma Jerzyk, turning them rabid, it would make sense. But the truth was far more disturbing, because it was human. 2 women had simply torn each other apart on a street corner. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a double autopsy. It is the silence of questions that have no good answers. Norris Ridgwick, Alan's deputy, joined him in the alley. Norris was green around the gills, shaken by the carnage. This was the reality of small-town policing. You spend years handing out traffic warnings and settling noise complaints, lulling yourself into a sense of pastoral security. Then the veneer cracks, and you are standing over 2 locals who have butchered one another with kitchen implements. They stood in the dark, recounting the madness. The feud between Wilma and Nettie had been simmering for months, a dispute over a barking dog, escalating to mud on laundry sheets, and finally exploding into lethal violence. But the escalation didn't sit right with Alan. It was too fast, too absolute. It defied the laws of human friction. Wilma was a bully, yes, and Nettie was fragile, having killed her husband years ago in a snap of insanity. But for them to meet like duelists at high noon, it felt staged, not by the women, but by circumstance. The narrative Alan spun for Norris was logical on the surface. Wilma killed Nettie's dog. Nettie retaliated by smashing Wilma's windows. They met and killed each other. Case closed. But deep in his gut, where the instincts of a good detective live, Alan felt the itch of wrongness. It was too neat. It was a puzzle where the pieces were forced together by a hammer. As Alan replayed the day, the timeline nagged at him. The police response, the crime scene photos, the gruesome dance of the bodies locked together, it was all procedure. But the motivation was the ghost in the machine. Why now? Why so extreme? The human mind craves patterns, but this pattern was fractured. They left the hospital, leaving the dead to the cold storage of the state. The drive back to the station was quiet, the darkness of Route 43 swallowing the headlights. When they arrived, the town of Castle Rock slept, unaware that its soul was being eroded, one violent act at a time. Alan dropped Norris off and drove on. He couldn't go home. His house was empty, a mausoleum of memories since his wife's death and his son's departure. Instead, he turned toward Polly Chalmers' house. In the face of death, the living seek warmth. Back at the station, Norris Ridgwick was trying to wash the night off him. The dispatcher, Sandy, was packing up, leaving Norris alone in the building. But he wasn't entirely alone. On his desk sat a gift, wrapped in blue foil with a velvet bow. This is how manipulation works in the hands of a master. It targets the insecurities and the petty grievances. Norris assumed the gift was from a secret admirer, or perhaps a peace offering. He opened the card. Just a reminder. The message was cryptic, threatening in its vagueness. Norris opened the box, reaching through the tissue paper. Snap! Agony tore up his arm. A large rat trap. The heavy steel bar slammed down on his fingers, crushing the nail of his index finger and bruising the bone. Norris screamed, dancing in a circle of pain and humiliation. The physical pain was blinding, but the psychological blow was worse. He immediately blamed Buster Keaton, the head selectman who had been riding him hard. This was the genius of the chaos descending on Castle Rock. The trap was a physical manifestation of the town's crumbling sanity. It made Norris paranoid, vindictive, and focused on a localized enemy, blinding him to the larger game being played. He didn't see a supernatural puppeteer. He saw the pettiness of local politics. As he ran his throbbing hand under cold water, the seeds of rage took root. He wasn't just a deputy anymore. He was a victim looking for payback. Across town, Alan slipped into bed beside Polly. She was awake, grieving for Nettie, her friend and employee. In the intimacy of the dark, they tried to make sense of the senseless. Polly revealed that Nettie had visited that morning, bringing food, seemingly calm. Nettie had even said she thought Wilma was finally leaving her alone. This revelation struck Alan like a physical blow. I haven't seen her or heard from her. If Nettie believed the feud was dying down on the very morning she supposedly went on a window-smashing rampage, the timeline was broken. Alan lay in the dark, his mind churning. A criminal case is like a walled garden. You just have to find the gate. But here, the gate kept moving. If Nettie didn't throw the rocks, who did? If Wilma didn't escalate the fight, who did? The logic of the investigation was failing because the variables were being manipulated by an outside force. Alan was trying to solve a murder, but he was actually wrestling with a mirage. The tragic irony was palpable. 2 women were dead because of a misunderstanding engineered to look like a feud. The notes wrapped around the rocks. "This is your last warning," were generic enough to be misunderstood, specific enough to trigger rage. Alan fell asleep with the uneasy realization that the events of the day were a trompe-l'oeil, a trick of the eye masking a darker truth. While the sheriff slept, the cancer in Castle Rock metastasized. In the shadows of the Baptist parsonage, a young man named Ricky Bissonette crept through the bushes. Ricky wasn't a killer. He was just a kid who wanted something he shouldn't have. He had made a deal with the new shopkeeper, Leland Gaunt. In exchange for illicit, impossible photographs of a celebrity, photos that catered to his deepest lusts, Ricky had agreed to play a prank. He slipped a note through the Reverend's mail slot. The content was vile, a stream of sectarian abuse designed to ignite the tension between the Catholics and the Baptists. It accused the Baptists of sexual deviancy and threatened violence if they opposed the upcoming casino night. It was a small act, a piece of paper on a rug, but in the volatile atmosphere of Castle Rock, it was a match dropped into gasoline. Ricky ran off into the night thinking only of his pornographic reward, unaware that he was a soldier in a war he didn't understand, and watching it all, like a spider at the center of a vibrating web, was Leland Gaunt. Gaunt stood at the window of his apartment above Needful Things. The room behind him was a testament to his true nature. It was completely empty, no furniture, no bed, no personal effects, just dust bunnies and the illusion of habitation provided by curtains visible from the street. He didn't need sleep. He didn't need comfort. He needed action. He looked out over the sleeping town, his face lit by the intermittent flash of the traffic light. To him, Castle Rock was not a community of people. It was a circuit board. He was the electrician of the human soul. He knew exactly which wires to cross to create a spark. He had hot-wired Wilma to Nettie using the grief of a dead dog and the rage of a broken window. Now he was wiring the Catholics to the Baptists, the deputy to the selectmen. It was a game of supply and demand, but the currency was misery. Gaunt locked his hands together behind his back, squeezing until his sharp yellow nails pierced his own palms, drawing blackish red blood. He didn't feel pain. He felt the delicious feedback of the town's nightmares. As he squeezed, he projected his will outward. Across the town, the dreamscape shifted. Brian Rusk cried out in his sleep, haunted. Myra Evans drifted into a sexually charged fantasy involving Elvis. Danforth Keaton, the gambler, dreamed of horses trampling him. Hugh Priest dreamed of fire. And Polly Chalmers, sleeping beside Alan, moaned as the charm she had bought, the charm that relieved her arthritis, began to rustle against her skin, smelling faintly of dusty violets and ancient decay. Gaunt grinned, a hideous expression in the dark. He was feeding them their desires and their fears, mixing them into a poisonous cocktail. The grand opening was over. The deals had been made. Now, he was simply waiting for the inevitable chain reaction. The sun would rise soon, bringing a new week. But the true dawn had already passed for Castle Rock. The darkness was in control now, standing at a window above Main Street, watching, waiting, and smiling. Chapter 12. Monday, October 14th, Columbus Day, arrived in Castle Rock not with the crisp, pumpkin-spiced bite of autumn, but with a suffocating, unnatural heat. It was a weather anomaly that felt less like a meteorological quirk and more like a fever breaking out across the town's skin. The residents, gathering on the town common or idling on benches, muttered about holes in the ozone or oil fires in the Middle East, searching for logic in a situation that felt inherently wrong. While Indian summers were common, this 70-degree heat at 7 in the morning felt malicious. It was the kind of weather that shortens tempers and loosens the darker screws of the human psyche. The locals knew better than to acknowledge just how good the weather technically was. To praise it felt dangerous, especially given the recent explosion of violence at the intersection of Willow and Ford. The town's resident gossip, Lenny Partridge, held court on the courthouse steps, gleefully recounting the gory details of how Nettie Cobb had skewered her husband with a meat fork. The heat and the bloodshed seemed to feed off one another. Lenny suggested the sheriff ought to close the Mellow Tiger bar until the temperature dropped, sensing that this atmospheric pressure was a precursor to more contention. He was right, of course. In a Stephen King narrative, the environment is rarely just a backdrop. It is a conspirator. The rising mercury here serves as a physical manifestation of the rising madness Leland Gaunt is orchestrating. Meanwhile, Danforth Buster Keaton, the town's head selectman, was dissolving into a puddle of paranoia and sweat. Sitting in his study in soggy underwear, Keaton was far past the point of rational thought. He was oiling his Colt revolver, cycling through a plan that involved murdering his wife, killing Deputy Norris Ridgwick, and finally ending his own life. This is the psychological breaking point Gaunt preys upon, the isolation of the sufferer. Keaton believed he was being hunted by them, a nameless, faceless authority of persecutors. When the phone rang, Keaton nearly fired the gun in panic. It was Gaunt. His voice wasn't just a communication, it was a sedative, a balm for Keaton's blistered mind. Gaunt asked about the winning ticket toy. Keaton, momentarily forgetting his suicide pact, ceased his trembling. The toy worked. It predicted the races, but the joy was brittle. Keaton confessed that he had found pink slips at his house, proof that they were closing in. Here, Gaunt executes a masterclass in manipulation. Instead of dismissing Keaton's delusions, he validates them. He tells Keaton that they are indeed everywhere, but that he, Gaunt, is the only safe harbor. He lies about an electronic device on his phone that detects wiretaps to soothe Keaton's fear of surveillance. Gaunt reframes the narrative. Sheriff Pangborn isn't a lawman. He is the ringleader of the conspiracy against Keaton. By feeding Keaton's persecution complex, Gaunt weaponizes the man. He instructs Keaton not to act yet, to sow confusion by acting normal. Keaton, feeling the ecstasy of being understood, agrees. He is no longer a lone victim. He is a soldier in a secret war. Across town, the corruption of comfort continued with Everett Frankel. Everett, a physician's assistant, was a man ruled by vanity, and his new acquisition from Needful Things, a meerschaum pipe, was the totem of that vanity. He believed the pipe made him look wise, debonair, and superior. The object had become a fetter, binding him to Gaunt. On his way to a house call, the urge to visit the shop was magnetic. Even though the sign said closed, Gaunt opened the door for Everett. This is a recurring motif. The shop is always open for the addict. Gaunt reminded Everett of the price for the pipe, a prank to be played on Sally Ratcliffe. Everett was to slip an envelope marked Lovey under the seat of the car Sally had borrowed from her fiancé, the gym teacher Lester Pratt. Everett, relieved that the task seemed so harmless, agreed. Gaunt, ever the shapeshifter, played to Everett's ego, falsely claiming the pipe once belonged to Sherlock Holmes's creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Everett swallowed the lie whole, suppressing the earlier memory where Gaunt claimed it belonged to Hermann Goering. This is the power of the needful thing. It rewrites the buyer's reality to protect the transaction. Everett drove away, checking his reflection in the mirror, oblivious to the fact that he was spreading poison. The tension in town wasn't just individual, it was tribal. Albert Gendron, the massive Catholic dentist, arrived at his office to find a hateful note taped to his door, written in red marker by the Concerned Baptist Men of Castle Rock. It blasted him for his popish idolatry and threatened hellfire if the upcoming casino night wasn't cancelled. Albert, a man of significant size and temper, crumpled the note. The religious fault lines in Castle Rock were cracking open. Gaunt doesn't need to invent hatred. He simply needs to turn up the heat under the pot that is already simmering. The narrative then shifts to the arrival of a predator. A lime green Dodge Challenger with jacked up rear tires and a roaring engine rolled across the tin bridge. Inside was Ace Merrill. For those familiar with the lore, Ace is the quintessential bully of Castle Rock's past, the tormentor from the body or Stand By Me. But time has been cruel to Ace. He is greying, desperate, and carrying a debt that could get him killed. Ace's swagger masked a terrifying reality. He owed $85,000 to a pair of cocaine-dealing brothers in Connecticut, the Corsons. After getting ripped off in a bad deal involving baking soda instead of blow, Ace had been given a deadline. Come up with the money by November 1st or die. He had returned to Castle Rock not for nostalgia, but because he had hit a psychological vapor lock. He was paralyzed by fear, and some instinct drew him home. He saw the sign for Needful Things and the help wanted notice. Inside, Ace tried to buy a book he had seen in the window, Lost and Buried Treasures of New England, authored by his own late uncle Reginald Pop Merrill. But when Gaunt handed him the book, it was Treasure Island. Gaunt played with Ace's perception, gaslighting him, making the book change titles before his eyes. Gaunt knew everything about Ace, his debt, his desperation, and his skills as a driver. He offered Ace a job. Drive to Boston to pick up a car, a rare Tucker, and bring it back. In exchange, he offered Ace a solution to his financial woes. To seal the deal, Gaunt produced two things. First, a map found inside the book, a map drawn on a brown paper bag in Pop Merrill's handwriting, marked with crosses that hinted at buried fortune. Second, a pile of high-grade cocaine on a silver mirror. Gaunt referred to the drug as a hybrid from the plains of Leng, a chilling Lovecraftian reference that suggests this substance is not of this earth. Ace snorted the lines. The effect was instantaneous and metaphysical. The world sharpened into hyper-clarity. He could read the map. He could see the potential for wealth. The cocaine acted as a binding agent, enslaving Ace to Gaunt, just as the pipe enslaved Everett. Ace agreed to the job. He was no longer just a washed-up hood. He was an employee of the devil, fueled by supernatural stimulant. As Ace left the shop, he ran into Sheriff Alan Pangborn. This confrontation is classic Western cinema. The lawman and the outlaw facing off on a dusty street. Only here the dust is heat and exhaust fumes. Alan, sensing trouble, questioned Ace. Ace deflected with arrogance, flashing his valid license and hiding his fear behind sunglasses. The interaction was a stalemate, but it triggered Alan's intuition. As Ace roared away in his loud car, Alan looked at Needful Things. He had seen Ace come out, yet the sign on the door read closed. Alan felt the weight of eyes upon him, the sensation of being watched from behind the shop's drawn shades. He approached the door, but the feeling vanished, leaving him standing in the oppressive heat. Pangborn retreated to his cruiser, the digital thermometer at the bank mocking him with a reading of 82 degrees. The chapter closes with the sheriff gripping the steering wheel, unable to shake the feeling that the town is slipping out of his grasp. The heat is rising, the players are in motion, and the sale of the century is well underway. Castle Rock is a powder keg, and Leland Gaunt is gleefully handing out matches. Chapter 13. The schools in Castle Rock were closed for a holiday, but for young Brian Rusk, the day off offered no reprieve. He wasn't physically ill. No fever, no spots, no stomach bugs. Yet he was suffering from a sickness far more profound. It was a malady of the soul, a grey infection deep within his essential makeup that no doctor could diagnose. The sunny disposition he was known for had been swallowed by a heavy psychological overcast. This spiritual rot had begun the moment he threw mud at Wilma Jerzik's laundry, intensified when Leland Gaunt visited his dreams, and now staring at his father's newspaper. The storm broke completely. The headline was a hammer blow. Murderous spat leaves 2 women dead. Brian stared at the photos of Nettie Cobb and Wilma Jerzik. He knew them. He knew Nettie was kind, and he knew Wilma was terrifying. But more importantly, he knew that he was the catalyst. The realization that his actions, driven by the desire for a rare Sandy Koufax baseball card, had led to a duel to the death made the cereal in his bowl turn to ash in his mouth. King often explores the corruption of innocence, and here we see it in its rawest form. Brian isn't just a kid who made a mistake. He is a child who has been manipulated into becoming an accessory to manslaughter. When his little brother Sean tries to cheer him up, suggesting a trip to the arcade, Brian snaps. He can't go back to the arcade. He can't go back to being a normal kid. He is separated from his peers by the weight of his secret sin. He tries to buy a moment of redemption by giving Sean his piggy bank savings, a desperate bargaining attempt to balance his karmic ledger. While Brian spiraled into a depression so deep he actually contemplated his father's shotgun, a chilling reminder of how quickly guilt can destroy a child's rational mind, his mother, Cora, was physically present but mentally light years away. She was wearing the sunglasses she bought at Needful Things. To the observer, she was just a woman dancing in a bathrobe. But in her mind, the glasses transported her to Graceland. She was hallucinating a perfect air-conditioned reality with the king of rock and roll, completely dissociated from the tragedy unfolding in her own town and the suicidal ideation of her son upstairs. It is a masterful juxtaposition of horror and absurdity. The son contemplates death, while the mother dances in a delusion. Upstairs, Brian checked his treasure. The 1956 Sandy Koufax card was still there. It was the only thing he had to show for this nightmare. He clung to it, not out of joy, but out of the sunk cost fallacy. If he lost the card, the women would still be dead, but he would have nothing. But then, paranoia struck. He remembered Mrs. Mislabursky, the neighbor. Had she seen him? The phone rang. Brian was terrified it was Sheriff Pangborn. He was certain the law was coming to drag him away. But when he finally picked up the receiver, it wasn't the police. It was the soft, soothing voice of Mr. Gaunt. Gaunt didn't threaten him. Instead, he did something far more insidious. He validated the lie. He told Brian that lying to the neighbor about the argument was the right thing to do, that he had handled it like a champ. Gaunt's power here lies not in force, but in absolution. He twists Brian's moral compass until the boy believes that the devil knows best. Meanwhile, at the local middle school, Sally Ratcliffe was preparing to leave early. Sally was the speech therapist, a deeply religious and somewhat repressed young woman engaged to the high school gym teacher, Lester Pratt. She was also a customer of Mr. Gaunt, having purchased a splinter of wood supposedly from Noah's Ark. Sally's psychology is crucial here. She is a woman who prides herself on her piety and her relationship with God, yet she harbors deep insecurities. She borrows Lester's Mustang for the afternoon, feeling a sense of smug ownership over him. But that complacency is shattered when she finds an envelope under the seat. It's labeled Lovey. Inside, she finds a photograph and a letter that seem to dismantle her entire reality. The photo depicts a man who looks exactly like Lester from the back, complete with his crew cut and a watch she gave him, groping a woman in a bar. The woman appears to be Judy Libby, Lester's ex-girlfriend who left the church. The letter is a masterclass in triggering insecurity. Written in a bubbly, feminine hand, it taunts Lester about their naughty behavior, their sexual chemistry, and mocks Sally as someone too busy going steady with Jesus. We must pause to appreciate the manipulation. Whether the photo is real or a fabrication by Gaunt is almost irrelevant. It is tailored to hit Sally's specific weak points, her sexual repression, and her fear of being replaced by a looser woman. The letter uses religious language, in remembrance of me, in a sexual context, which is the ultimate blasphemy to Sally. It converts her love into a radioactive, murderous rage. She doesn't verify the facts. She lets the jealousy consume her. The trust of the innocent, as she realizes, is easily weaponized. She fled home, tearing through her room to find her holy splinter. She needed the peace it usually brought her, the hallucination of the ark and the animals. But when she held the wood this time, the peaceful visions didn't come. Instead, the wood served as a conduit for a darker voice. Mr. Gaunt spoke from within the relic, whispering that she needed to take care of this nasty business. The religious artifact had become a receiver for malevolent command, turning her prayer into a preparation for vengeance. While Sally stewed in a darkness of her own making, Polly Chalmers sat in her dress shop, bathed in sunlight. Polly provides the contrast to the other characters. She, too, is a victim of Gaunt's wares, but she's currently in the honeymoon phase of her addiction. She was sewing, something she hadn't been able to do without agony for months. The arthritis in her hands was gone, banished by the Azka amulet she wore against her skin. She knew Nettie and Wilma were dead. She felt the pangs of guilt, knowing her involvement in Nettie's life had inadvertently set the stage for the tragedy. But the pain relief was too intoxicating to ignore. Polly touched the amulet, marveling at the freedom it gave her. She thought about the price she would eventually have to pay Mr. Gaunt. In a moment of tragic, dramatic irony, she told herself that whatever the price was, it would be a bargain. She is like a junkie enjoying the high, utterly blind to the inevitable crash. The town of Castle Rock is fracturing. Brian is traumatized, Cora is dissociated, Sally is radicalized, and Polly is sedated, all while Leland Gaunt pulls the strings, one soul at a time. Chapter 14. We return to the unravelling fabric of Castle Rock, where the corrosive influence of Leland Gaunt has begun to seep into the mundane bureaucracy of the town. In the selectman's office, we find Buster Keaton, a man whose psychological architecture is rapidly collapsing under the weight of paranoia. He shares a secretary, Ariadne, with the rest of the board. She is a woman of simple joys and physical abundance, someone Buster tolerates specifically because he deems her too unintelligent to be one of them, the invisible, persecuting force his deteriorating mind has conjured. There is a terrifying banality to the way evil takes root here. Ariadne brings Buster a routine fund release form for Deke Bradford. It's just paperwork. But in Buster's hands, it becomes a death warrant for the town's peace. Deke is asking for money to buy dynamite to clear a granite ridge. He requests 16 cases. Buster, feeling a surge of manic purpose, fueled by his gambling delusions and his secret alliance with Gaunt, doesn't just approve it, he alters the request. He bumps the budget and adds a directive to purchase 20 cases. Consider the psychology here. Buster feels powerless in his own life, haunted by them. Yet here, with a stroke of a pen, he authorizes enough explosive power to level a city block. It is a reclaiming of agency through destruction. He smiles, a gesture that strikes Ariadne as deeply unsettling, and tells her to have the dynamite stored in the public works shed, a shed only he has the key to. The trap is set, not with a grand villainous speech, but with a bureaucratic signature. Meanwhile, the narrative shifts to Ace Merrill, who has ventured far outside his comfort zone to a desolate, ruinous section of Cambridge, Massachusetts. King paints this landscape with a brush dipped in urban decay and Lovecraftian dread. Ace arrives at a windowless cinder-block garage on Whipple Street, a place that feels disconnected from reality, silent and watching. There is a palpable sense of cosmic horror here. Ace spots graffiti that reads, "Yog Sothoth rules." For those familiar with the lore, this is a nod to the ancient eldritch entities that exist in the King multiverse, suggesting that Gaunt isn't just a magic shop owner, but a tether to something ancient and evil. The garage door opens automatically, responding to Ace's horn, revealing a space that feels staged, waiting. Inside, there is a car under a tarp, crates, and a reel-to-reel tape recorder. Ace plays the tape, and Gaunt's voice fills the empty room. It is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Gaunt isn't there physically, yet his presence is suffocating. He commands Ace to load the crates. Curiosity wars with fear in Ace's mind. He pries open the crates. The contents are an escalation of violence, blasting caps, high-powered automatic pistols, and ammunition. This isn't just mischief. This is an arsenal for a small war. Ace, a small-time bully, balks. He considers running, maybe stealing a gun and heading to Mexico. But Gaunt is always 2 steps ahead. The tape recorder spins again, unprompted, delivering a chilling threat. If Ace tries to run, he will suffer eternally. Here we see the nature of Ace's character. He is a predator, yes, but he is also a submissive creature when faced with a true alpha. The psychological profile of a bully often hides a deep-seated need to be dominated by superior strength. Ace folds. He accepts his role as a soldier. He uncovers the car. It is a canary yellow Tucker Talisman, a vehicle that shouldn't exist, gleaming with a supernatural aura. It's seductive, beautiful, and wrong. In the trunk, Ace finds his reward, high-grade cocaine with a note instructing him to partake. This is the carrot to the stick. The drug suppresses his fear, numbing the rational part of his brain that screams, "This is a nightmare." The drive back to Maine reinforces the supernatural nature of Gaunt's tools. The Tucker Talisman is an entity unto itself. It doesn't need gas. When Ace tries to fill it, the pump jockey is terrified of the machine, sensing its wrongness. The car pays its own tolls and is invisible to police radar. It is a phantom chariot, speeding Ace back to the rock at over 100 miles an hour, invisible to the laws of man and physics. Ace arrives at Needful Things under the cover of darkness. The transaction that follows is perhaps the most gruesome illustration of Gaunt's true nature. Ace unloads the weapons, feeling proud, high, and useful. Gaunt praises him, deepening the bond of servitude. But as Ace prepares to leave, promised a nondescript Chevy for his next task, Gaunt offers a handshake. In his narcotic haze, Ace reaches out. He realizes too late that Gaunt is not offering a hand, but holding a dead Norway rat, its neck broken, its intestines spilling out into Gaunt's palm. Gaunt plays it off as a joke, a snack he forgot he was holding, but the veil has slipped. Ace sees the monster. He sees the gore. But his mind, desperate to protect itself and cushioned by the drugs, rejects the reality. He forces himself to believe it was a rubber prop. This is the power of denial. When the truth is too horrific, the mind simply edits it out to preserve sanity. Ace drives away in the Chevy, equipped with digging tools for his next dark errand, laughing manically to drown out the memory of the rat. While Ace descends into madness, we cut to the tragic counterpoint of Lester Pratt. Lester is a simple soul, returning from a religious revival, filled with hymns and the innocent hope of seeing his fiancée, Sally. He is the archetype of the good boy, which makes his impending corruption all the more painful. He finds his car damaged in the driveway and assumes Sally is waiting for him. But instead of a lover's embrace, he finds a message spray-painted in hot pink across his windshield. "Go to hell, you cheating bastard." The psychological whiplash is brutal. Lester, high on spiritual camaraderie, is instantly plunged into confusion and despair. He assumes she thinks he was with another woman at the revival. The tragedy here is the lack of communication engineered by Gaunt. We find Sally at her friend Irene's house, utterly broken. She has fallen for Gaunt's fabrication, the fake letter and photo depicting Lester's infidelity. She has burned the evidence, destroying the only way the truth could be revealed. Irene comforts her, but there is a dark undercurrent to Irene's sympathy. She enjoys the drama, and she secretly lusts after Lester herself. Even in this moment of shared grief, the seeds of selfishness and opportunism are sprouting. The chapter closes on this note of fractured innocence. Gaunt has armed the town with dynamite and automatic weapons, and he has severed the emotional bonds of its youth. The stage is set for violence, fueled by misunderstandings that are now too deep to bridge. The darkness has fully descended on Castle Rock, and the nightmare is no longer just approaching. It is here, driving a yellow car and shaking hands with dead things. Chapter 15. The web of Castle Rock is tightening. We begin at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, where the psychological dismantling of the town continues with surgical precision. Mr. Gaunt's first appointment is Lucille Dunham. Now, Lucille isn't a bad person. She's a waitress working for peanuts, a woman who looks at the finer things in life through a sheet of impenetrable glass. But Gaunt knows exactly which lever to pull. He dangles a set of black pearls in front of her, an item she couldn't afford in 3 lifetimes, and offers them for a pittance, less than $40. This is the classic Faustian bargain, stripped of the sulfur and brimstone and replaced with retail therapy. Lucille walks out in a daze of dopamine and greed. She has her pearls, and in exchange, she has promised to play a prank on Reverend Rose. To her, it seems harmless, a bit of fun to poke at a man who never tips. But that's the genius of Gaunt's manipulation. He breaks the moral compromise down into bite-sized, palatable pieces. He knows that if you can get a good Methodist to justify a little malice as just desserts, you've already won their soul. As Gaunt watches her leave, he's a man satisfied. The machinery of his chaos is fully oiled. The carnival rides are about to start screaming. While Gaunt counts his victories, Sheriff Alan Pangborn is trying to make sense of a reality that no longer adds up. He's in his office, toying with silver dollars, practicing sleight of hand, a fitting metaphor for a man trying to see through the illusions surrounding him. He gets a call from Henry Peyton at the state police, and the news is scientifically baffling. The forensics on the dog killed at Nettie Cobb's place don't match the narrative. The vet confirms the dog died hours before Wilma Jerzyk could have possibly done it. Furthermore, the handwriting on the threatening note doesn't match Wilma's, and the bloody fingerprints on the door belong to a male with large hands. Here, King is playing with the locked room mystery trope, but inverted. Alan realizes that while Wilma is a natural suspect because of her personality, the timeline clears her. This creates a terrifying dissonance for a lawman. The evidence says one thing, but the town's emotional volatility says another. Peyton mentions a witness, Jill Mislebursky, who saw a young boy fleeing the scene on a bike. Alan's unease grows. He senses the shadows moving on the wall, but can't quite see the monster casting them. In the outer office, the chaos is more domestic, but no less significant. Deputy John Lapointe is tearing his desk apart. He's lost his wallet. It's a moment of slapstick comedy, drawers falling on Alan's feet, papers flying everywhere. But in the architecture of this story, it is a load-bearing pillar. That wallet contains a photo of John's ex-girlfriend, a sentimental anchor he can't let go of. Its disappearance isn't an accident. It's a theft that will have nuclear consequences later. Back at the shop, the siren call continues. Babs Miller enters, desperate for a specific music box. Gaunt plays her like a fiddle. The music box isn't just wooden gears. It triggers a sensory flashback to a sexual awakening in her youth, a memory of a lost love and a perfect moment. Gaunt is selling nostalgia, weaponizing the past to destroy the future. He locks eyes with her, and she is gone, willing to pay any price to own that feeling again. Alan, meanwhile, follows up on the lead regarding the boy. He visits Gillian Mislebursky. She identifies the kid on the bike as Brian Rusk. But the detail that chills Alan, the detail that transforms this from a prank to something darker, is her observation of a cooler in the boy's bike basket, a cooler heavy enough to be unstable. Alan, utilizing his policeman's intuition, connects the dots to the rocks thrown through the windows. It's a sickening realization. The corruption has trickled down to the children. Brian Rusk, barely an adolescent, is being used as an instrument of terror. The narrative shifts back to Needful things, where the clientele shifts from the nostalgic to the resentful. Sonny Jacket, a mechanic, walks in. Sonny is a ball of blue-collar grievance and ingrained prejudice. Gaunt, the ultimate chameleon, instantly mirrors Sonny's worldview. They bond over a shared hatred of politics and a casual, ugly racism. It's a disturbing scene because it shows Gaunt's lack of true identity. He is a void that reflects the customer's worst self back at them. Sonny buys a high-end socket wrench set. The price? A deed. He agrees to sabotage the vehicles of Don Hemphill and Reverend Rose. Sonny views this as a strike against the psalm-singing elite, unaware that he's merely a pawn on a board he can't even see. Then we descend into the truly delusional with Myra Evans. Myra's obsession is Elvis Presley. She has bought a picture of the king from Gaunt, but this is no ordinary photo. It is a portal to a hallucinatory relationship where she travels with Elvis on his jet and shares his bed. But the addiction requires maintenance. Gaunt appears to her in a terrifying vision, his face blistering, revealing the demon beneath, and demands payment. If she doesn't comply, the picture ages, the fantasy rots. Driven by the fear of losing her imaginary lover, Myra goes to the home of Henry Beaufort, the owner of the local bar. In a trance-like state, empowered by a manic energy, she slashes the tires of his beloved Thunderbird with a bayonet. She leaves a note designed to frame a frog, a slur intended to ignite tensions between the town's factions. Myra's transformation is complete. She has traded her sanity for a daydream, committing vandalism with a smile before rushing back to her bed to commune with a ghost. The contagion of paranoia spreads to the upper crust of Castle Rock. Lenore Potter, a wealthy woman who pampers her aura and talks about karma, storms into the shop. Her flower beds have been destroyed. She blames her neighbour, Stephanie Bonsaint, convinced it's an act of jealousy. In reality, we know this was the work of Melissa Clutterbuck, paying her own debt to Gaunt. Gaunt feeds Lenore's paranoia, nurturing the seed of violence until it blooms. He hands her a gun. It's a stark escalation. We've gone from pranks to property damage, and now firearms. Lenore, the woman of peace and meditation, takes the weapon, justifying it as protection of her property and karma. The hypocrisy is staggering, yet entirely human. She leaves with the gun in her purse, her aura supposedly cleansed, but her potential for murder activated. Elsewhere, the guilt is eating Norris Ridgwick alive. The mild-mannered deputy is crouching outside the home of the town drunk, Hugh Priest. Norris has purchased a Basin fishing rod, a thing of beauty he is terrified to even use. To pay for it, he must slash Hugh's tires. This scene is a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. Norris knows this is wrong. He is a lawman. Yet the fear of the needful thing being taken away, or worse, damaged by Gaunt's retribution, overrides his morality. He commits the crime, hating himself with every slice of the blade, leaving a threatening note to further the confusion. He drives away, clutching the fishing rod like a talisman, trying to soothe his conscience with the physical object of his desire. Finally, we return to the shop for the most heartbreaking transaction of the day. Slopey Dodd, the town's stuttering boy, arrives. He has kept a pewter teapot intended for his mother. Gaunt confronts him, not with anger, but with a twisted validation of selfishness. He tells the boy that keeping the item was the right thing to do. To demonstrate his power, Gaunt briefly cures Slopey's stutter. For a few moments, the boy speaks clearly, a miracle he would give anything to keep. But Gaunt snatches it back. It's a cruel display of dominance, proving that he controls the boy's reality. He hands Slopey a wallet, the very wallet stolen from Deputy Lapointe earlier, and orders him to hide it in Coach Pratt's car. Slopey, terrified and desperate to please the man who can unlock his voice, agrees. The chapter ends with the boy walking out, carrying the planted evidence that will likely ruin a man's life. The trap is set. The innocent are corrupted, the greedy are weaponized, and the authorities are chasing ghosts, while the real monster sits behind the counter, ticking names off a list. Chapter 16. The sun beat down on Homeland Cemetery with an intensity that felt misplaced for October, casting a stark, unforgiving light on the final resting place of Nettie Cobb. She lay in a modest grey casket, a final gift from Polly Chalmers, suspended over the dark earth. Beside the grave, a carpet of artificial grass gleamed with a chemically bright green hue, a jarring attempt to sanitize death that made Sheriff Alan Pangborn's skin crawl. It felt obscene, this plastic lie covering the reality of the worms and the roots waiting below. It was a perfect metaphor, really, for what was happening in Castle Rock. A veneer of normalcy stretched thin over something rotting. Reverend Killingworth spoke of Nettie's bravery, her struggle to return to the world from the shadows of her own mind. He offered the mourners a comforting Irish blessing, suggesting that Nettie was already in heaven before the devil knew she was dead. But looking at the small, heat-drenched gathering, one had to wonder if the devil was merely late getting the news, or if he was already here, standing just out of sight, smiling. Across the hill, the funeral for Wilma Jerzyk was also underway. It was a study in contrasts. Wilma's side was crowded with cars, a testament not to her popularity but to her husband's social standing. On Nettie's side, the turnout was sparse. Just Polly, Alan, Rosalie Drake, the ever-present Lenny Partridge, and Deputy Norris Ridgwick, who looked pale and haunted. As the service ended and Polly wept, Alan held her close. He felt the trembling of her body, but his policeman's eyes were already scanning the perimeter, sensing that the shadows in this town were growing longer, regardless of the high sun. He noticed Polly's hand in his, a hand that had been a claw of agony only days ago. Now she gripped him with a strength and fluidity that was impossible. Miracles, Alan knew, usually came with a price tag. While the dead were being committed to the earth, the machinery of Castle Rock's destruction continued to grind forward. Eddie Warburton, acting as Leland Gaunt's delivery boy, arrived at Polly's house. He wasn't there to steal, but to plant a seed of chaos. He slipped an official-looking envelope through the mail slot. It landed softly on the floor, a timed explosive made of paper. The return address read, San Francisco Department of Child Welfare. It sat there, waiting like a coiled viper in the cool silence of the hallway. Back at the cemetery, Alan and Polly walked to his car. He couldn't ignore the change in her any longer. He pressed her about her hands. Polly, flushed with a mix of relief and defensive pride, admitted she had found a new doctor. When she dropped the name Leland Gaunt, alarm bells rang in Alan's head. They drove to the shop, the tension in the car mounting with every mile. When they parked in front of Needful Things, Alan saw the sign, by appointment only. It felt wrong. It felt like a trap. When he expressed his skepticism, calling the cure a quack remedy, the air in the car turned frigid. Polly wasn't just defending a shopkeeper. She was defending her salvation. Pain is a powerful motivator, and the absence of pain is an intoxicant. Polly was drunk on relief, and Alan was trying to take the bottle away. She showed him the charm. The Azka. To Alan, the silver object looked innocuous, yet repulsive. He had a visceral urge to snatch it and hurl it out the window, but he held his tongue, realizing that logic has no place when arguing with a miracle. Polly, sensing his doubt, shut him out. She was angry, not just because he doubted Gaunt, but because his doubt threatened the fragile reality she was clinging to. She got out of the car, leaving Alan with a cold goodbye and the sound of a small silver bell tinkling as she entered the spider's web. Inside the shop, the atmosphere shifted. Mr. Gaunt was the picture of solicitude. He saw Polly's distress caused by Alan's rationality, and used it. He was a master of validation. He soothed her, assured her that her check was good, and then, with the precision of a surgeon, he cut to the chase. The check wasn't enough. There is always a hidden cost. Gaunt told her she needed to perform a prank to fully pay for the Azka. When Polly hesitated, terrified he meant a prank on Alan, Gaunt corrected her. He wanted her to target Ace Merrill. But to ensure her compliance, he stopped being the kindly shopkeeper and became the entity that knew her darkest secrets. He spoke of San Francisco. He spoke of her dead child, Kelton. This is where the psychological horror of Needful Things truly bleeds through. Gaunt didn't just sell items. He traded in shame. He stripped Polly of her defenses by revealing he knew exactly how her baby died. The drug-addicted babysitter, the fire, the tragedy born of Polly's pride and refusal to ask her parents for help. He held her past over her head, like a guillotine blade. To keep the Azka working, to keep the pain away, and to keep her secret buried, she had to obey. Broken and weeping, Polly agreed. She wiped her face, composed herself, and accepted the envelope he gave her. She walked out of the store not as a customer, but as an accomplice. Meanwhile, the corruption spread to the schools. Alan Pangborn, seeking answers about the vandalism at the Jersic house, went to find Brian Rusk. He intercepted the boy after school. Alan tried to break the ice with a magic trick, producing a bouquet of paper flowers from his sleeve. It fell flat. Brian Rusk was a boy who had seen too much. The look in his eyes wasn't wonder. It was the exhausted, hollow stare of someone who has peered behind the curtain of reality and seen the gears grinding. He was holding a cooler, which he claimed held baseball cards. Alan pressed him, gently at first, then with growing urgency. He asked about the rocks, about the monster. Brian's responses were heartbreaking. He admitted he knew how the magic tricks were done now, and that the knowledge made him unhappy. He was a child grieving the loss of his own innocence. He confessed to fear, a deep, trembling terror of a monster that might eat him up. But when the police radio squawked, the moment of connection shattered. Brian clambered up, shutting down completely. Alan watched him ride away, a small figure burdened by a weight no child should carry. At the middle school, another of Gaunt's pranks was detonating. Sally Ratcliffe, the speech teacher, had been tasked with humiliating Principal Frank Jewett. Fueled by her own heartbreak over Lester Pratt and a strange, mean-spirited liberation Gaunt's influence provided, she broke into Jewett's locked drawer. She found his secret stash of magazines, not just pornography, but illicit material featuring young boys. With a mix of horror and exhilaration, she scattered the magazines across his office. It was an act of total destruction. When Jewett returned with the basketball coach and the school secretary, his life ended in seconds. The tableau was undeniable. The secret was out. But the final nail in the coffin was the envelope Sally had left on the desk. It contained photos of Jewett's past indiscretions and a blackmail note from his friend George Nelson. Jewett stood amidst the wreckage of his reputation, his mind snapping. The betrayal by a friend, the public exposure, the sudden shift from authority figure to pariah, it was too much. His shock curdled instantly into a murderous rage. He wasn't thinking of defense. He was thinking of revenge. Back at her home, Polly Chalmers walked into the trap Eddie Warburton had laid. She opened the letter from San Francisco. It appeared to be a response to an inquiry from Sheriff Alan Pangborn. The letter was a forgery, a masterpiece of gaslighting crafted by Gaunt. It made it look as though Alan had been investigating her past, digging into the sealed records of her time in California, prying into the death of her child. For Polly, this was the ultimate betrayal. She had trusted Alan. She had let him into her life. And now the evidence suggested he was nothing more than a cop, treating her like a suspect, digging for dirt. The shame of her past, which Gaunt had just freshly reopened in the shop, now felt like a weapon Alan had been secretly sharpening. Her love turned to ash, and in its place a cold, hard fury took root. She felt exposed, violated, and utterly alone. The poison was moving fast now, infecting everyone. Lester Pratt, Sally's boyfriend, was leaving the high school, confused and angry about Sally's silence. He got into his Mustang and found a wallet under the seat. It belonged to Deputy John LaPointe. Inside, he found a picture of LaPointe and Sally together, smiling, happy. It was an old photo from before they had broken up, but Lester didn't know that. And then, Slopey Dodd, a student manipulated by Gaunt, rolled up on his skateboard to deliver the killing blow. He lied to Lester, claiming he'd seen LaPointe and Sally sucking face in the car just days ago. Lester Pratt was a big man, generally peaceful, but every man has a breaking point. The jealousy, stoked by the physical evidence and the witness testimony, bypassed his logic entirely. The vein in his forehead pulsed, his vision narrowed. The world simplified into a target. He drove away, not as a teacher or a boyfriend, but as a weapon aimed at John LaPointe. The chapter culminates in a collision of these disparate disasters. Alan, still in his car, received a patch-through call from Polly. He expected an apology, or perhaps just a conversation. What he got was a verbal assault. Polly was screaming, incoherent with rage, accusing him of snooping, of wearing a mask. Alan was blindsided. He had no idea about the forged letter. He tried to reason with her, but she was beyond reason. She was speaking from the deep well of her own pain and humiliation. She cut the connection, leaving Alan staring at the radio, stunned and reeling. Before he could even process the loss of his relationship, duty intervened. Henry Payton called with a breakthrough on the Nettie Cobb case. The fingerprints on the door matched Hugh Priest. Alan stood at the intersection of his personal life and his professional duty, and the road was crumbling beneath his feet. The town was tearing itself apart, teachers destroying principals, lovers turning on each other, friends plotting murder. He gave the order to pick up Hugh Priest, his voice steady, masking the chaos inside. He drove toward the town garage, his mind trying to focus on the suspect, but his heart stuck on Polly's furious voice. He didn't know it yet, but he was fighting a war on multiple fronts, and the enemy was already inside the gates, selling their demise one trinket at a time. The sun dipped lower, but the heat remained, oppressive and unrelenting, as Castle Rock slid further into the dark. Chapter 17. The disintegration of Castle Rock wasn't a slow fade. It was a series of snapping cables, one after another, until the bridge of civility simply collapsed. It began with Henry Beaufort, a man whose identity was welded to his possessions. Standing in his driveway, Henry stared at his Thunderbird. The tires were slashed, which was bad enough, but the jagged scratch running along the vehicle's side was a scar on Henry's own soul. He held the note from Hugh Priest, a petty, drunken scribble about being cut off in traffic. This is where the psychological genius of Leland Gaunt shines through. He understands that for men like Henry, the car isn't just metal and glass. It is an extension of the self. To damage it is to assault the man. Henry's rage wasn't just anger. It was a cold, lethal determination. He considered his deer rifle, then escalated to the sawed-off Winchester shotgun he kept under the bar at the Mellow Tiger. He was going hunting, and the prey was Hugh Priest. While Henry let his fury curdle into a plan for murder, Frank Jewett was busy tearing apart the home of his so-called friend, George T. Nelson. Frank found the cocaine he was looking for and flushed it, an act of spite that triggered a psychosomatic cramp in his gut. But simple vandalism wasn't enough. The madness that had infected the town required desecration. Frank took a portrait of George's mother and defiled it in the most biological, humiliating way possible. It's fascinating to watch the regression here. Frank is stripping away layers of social evolution, returning to a primate state of flinging filth to mark territory and express dominance. He wasn't just a vandal anymore. He was a predator lying in wait. On the other side of town, the past was colliding with the violent present. Lenny Partridge, the oldest resident of the Rock and a living relic of a gentler time, was driving his rusting Chevy Bel Air over Castle Hill. He encountered Hugh Priest standing in the road, bare-chested and wearing that ridiculous moth-eaten foxtail. When Lenny stopped, concerned for the man's health, Hugh didn't see a neighbor. He saw a resource. Hugh hauled the fragile old man out of the car and tossed him aside like a bag of dry leaves. The sound of Lenny's bones snapping was the sound of Castle Rock's history breaking. Hugh stole the car, leaving the old man broken in the ditch, proving that in Gaunt's new world, the weak are not just ignored, they are trampled. The local law enforcement was completely unprepared for this tidal wave of insanity. Deputy Andy Clutterbuck arrived at Hugh's house, weapons drawn, sensing danger, but he missed the scene on the road. The chaos was moving too fast for standard police work. He was looking for a man who had already shed his humanity and stolen a getaway car. Back at the Mellow Tiger, Henry Beaufort was preparing for war, but even in his rage, there was a flicker of hesitation. His employee, Billy Tupper, managed to talk him into a drink. It was a small intervention, a moment where rationality almost won. The whiskey settled Henry's nerves. He realized that shooting Hugh Priest might not be worth a prison sentence. He decided to let the law handle it. It is one of the greatest tragedies of this story. Henry actually made the right choice eventually. But in a tragedy, the right choice often comes 10 minutes too late. Meanwhile, at the town garages, Alan Pangborn was trying to get a handle on the situation. He spoke with Deke Bradford, who revealed that Hugh Priest had been unraveling for a week. hollow-eyed, talking to himself. But the more ominous detail was the dynamite. Buster Keaton, the head selectman, had ordered a massive surplus of high explosives. This is a classic Stephen King setup, a Chekhov's gun in the form of 20 cases of explosives sitting in a shed, cooling under an air conditioner, waiting for a spark. The corruption of Hugh Priest reached its zenith when he visited Needful Things. He went there seeking salvation and found only an accelerant. He confessed his fears to Mr. Gaunt, the slashed tires, the threats. Gaunt, playing the role of the sympathetic enabler, handed Hugh a loaded automatic pistol. He framed it as protection of property, twisting Hugh's obsession with the foxtail into a life-or-death struggle. As Hugh left, armed and hallucinating that he was a warrior, Gaunt's facade slipped. He urged the drunk to party down, smoke rising from his skin, revealing the demonic pleasure he took in the impending slaughter. The violence finally spilled into the sheriff's station. Deputy John LaPointe was blindsided by Lester Pratt. Lester, convinced John was stealing his girlfriend, didn't just want to fight, he wanted to destroy. He battered John, breaking his nose, thrashing him around the office. It was a scene of primal rage, totally disconnected from reality. Sheila Brigham, the dispatcher, was forced to make a split-second decision. Seeing Lester strangling John, she grabbed a shotgun. She didn't fire. She swung it like a baseball bat. The stock connected with Lester's skull, ending his life instantly. The suddenness of the death, from a brawl to a corpse in 1 second, underscores the fragility of life when civilization evaporates. But the chaos wasn't contained. Outside, Buster Keaton, the man responsible for the town's governance, had fully succumbed to his paranoia. He rammed his Cadillac into Norris Ridgwick's Volkswagen. When Alan Pangborn tried to intervene, he found Buster raving about them, the persecutors he saw everywhere. Alan managed to handcuff Buster to his own car, a temporary fix for a mind that had completely shattered. Then, the inevitable happened at the Mellow Tiger. Hugh Priest walked in, reeking of sweat and gun grease, stepping over the body of Billy Tupper, whom he had just shot. He entered the dim bar ready to kill Henry Beaufort over a car scratch and a foxtail. Henry, who had decided to be peaceful, was forced back into violence. He popped up from behind the bar with his sawed-off shotgun. The exchange was deafening and final. They fired simultaneously. Hugh's bullet pierced Henry's lung. Henry's shotgun blast disintegrated Hugh's chest. It was a mutual destruction, senseless and complete. Henry, dying on the floor, tried to call for help, but the lines were ringing unanswered. The irony is suffocating. The very system he decided to trust had collapsed at the exact moment he needed it. Back at the municipal building, Alan Pangborn and Norris Ridgwick were trying to secure the scene. They found Sheila in shock and John LaPointe battered. The phones were ringing off the hook, Henry Beaufort's dying plea, but they were too overwhelmed to answer. They found the body on the floor, but it wasn't Hugh Priest. It was the gym teacher, Lester. The confusion was absolute. No one knew who was fighting whom anymore. The script of the town had been rewritten in gibberish. Outside, Buster Keaton, handcuffed to his Cadillac, hallucinated that the townspeople watching him were the them he feared. Guided by the voice of Mr. Gaunt in his head, he managed a grotesque escape, contorting his body to crawl through the car window while still cuffed. He drove off, crushing the hands of the banker Scott Garson in the process. It was a moment of slapstick horror, absurd, painful, and terrifying. In the house of George T. Nelson, the predator became the prey, then the hunter again. Frank Jewett, hiding behind the sofa, fell asleep, a physiological reaction to extreme stress. He woke up to George screaming about the dead parakeet. Trapped, Frank listened as George called his dealer, Leland Gaunt, and stormed out. Frank emerged, not relieved, but emboldened. The game wasn't over. He would track George down. The paranoia Gaunt sold them ensured that no conflict could end until one or both parties were dead. But the chapter reserves its most heartbreaking moment for last. This is the emotional anchor of the narrative, the moment where the fun of the chaos dies and the true cost is revealed. Brian Rusk, just a child, stood in his garage. He held the object of his obsession, a worthless baseball card of a minor leaguer, a piece of cardboard he had traded his soul for. His younger brother, Sean, found him there. Brian held his father's rifle. The interaction between the brothers is devastating. Brian wasn't crying or raging. He was eerily calm, possessing the 1,000-yard stare of a soldier who has seen too much. He made Sean swear on his own name, never to go to Needful things. He recognized Gaunt for what he was, a poison man, a creature not of this earth who had already taken their mother. Brian Rusk, a boy who just wanted a Sandy Koufax card, looked at his brother with love and finality. He dismissed the card, the very thing that lured him into the darkness, and pulled the trigger with his toe. The blast in the garage was the death knell of Innocence in Castle Rock. Downtown, in the silence of his shop, Leland Gaunt heard the distant echo of the shot. He smiled. He flipped the sign on his door to closed. His work here was entering its final phase. The seeds were planted, the weeds were choking the garden, and the harvest of souls had begun. "We're having fun now," he whispered to the empty room, a conductor satisfied with the dissonant, bloody symphony he had orchestrated. Chapter 18. While the seeds of chaos began to sprout in Castle Rock, Polly Chalmers found herself isolated at the desolate end of Town Road No. 3. She was standing at the old Camber property, a place synonymous with local tragedy. This is classic King atmospheric setting, using a location stained by previous blood, specifically the events of Cujo, to heighten the dread. Polly wasn't there for nostalgia. She was there because the pain in her hands had been held at bay by the silver charm Leland Gaunt had sold her, and now the bill was due. There is a profound psychological weight here. Polly isn't acting out of malice, but out of the terror of physical regression. She convinces herself that her actions are a justifiable response to her argument with Sheriff Alan Pangborn, but deep down, she knows she is being manipulated. The voice of her conscience tries to warn her, to scream that she is making a mistake, but the fear of her crippling arthritis is a louder, more demanding voice. She silences her doubts. She tells herself this is just a prank on Ace Merrill, a man she doesn't even know, but the uneasiness in her gut suggests she knows this is the beginning of something far darker. She entered the barn, a structure that felt like a gaping maw. The air seemed heavy, perhaps vibrating with the memory of the rabid St. Bernard that had once terrorized this yard. Following Mr. Gaunt's instructions, she retrieved a shovel and went behind the barn to the ruins of an old trailer. She found the marker, a large flat stone, and began to dig. It didn't take long to hit metal. She pulled up a rusted Crisco can, the vessel for the secrets of the dead. Inside, she found exactly what Gaunt had predicted: antique trading stamps and sordid photographs involving a woman and a dog. These were the leftovers of Pop Merrill's illicit hoarding, the kind of filth he used for leverage. Polly felt contaminated just touching them. She replaced the contents with a sealed envelope Gaunt had provided, a message intended for a treasure hunter. Then she did something cathartic yet eerie. She set the blackmail photos on fire. As the images curled into ash, the wind picked up, and a low mechanical growl emanated from the barn. It was the sound of a dog. Terrified by what felt like a ghostly manifestation of the killer dog Cujo, Polly fled to her car. She narrowly escaped her own imagination, speeding away without realizing the true gravity of what she had just done. She hadn't just buried a letter. She had planted a landmine. Meanwhile, on the other side of the societal tracks, Ace Merrill was waking up to a breakfast of cocaine. Ace represents the volatile element in Gaunt's chemical equation, pure, unadulterated ID. The drugs fueled his delusions of grandeur, making him feel invincible even as his resources dwindled. He made a phone call to a contact named Nat regarding the steel pennies he had dug up earlier, hoping for a windfall. The news was disappointing. The coins were worth a pittance. This disappointment is crucial to the narrative arc. If Ace had struck it rich with the pennies, he might have stopped. But the lack of value pushed him toward desperation. He returned to the treasure map Pop had left behind. His drug-addled mind zeroed in on the Camber place, noting 2 crosses marking the spot. Greed whispered that the real fortune, the diamonds rather than the dust, was waiting for him there. While Ace prepared for his excavation, a domestic nightmare was unfolding at the Keaton residence. Danforth Buster Keaton, the town's head selectman, was spiraling deep into psychosis. King paints a horrifying picture of a mind collapsing under the weight of paranoia. Buster believed they were persecuting him, even suspecting his garage door opener of emitting brain-scrambling rays. He sat in his car, handcuffed to the door handle, a self-imposed bondage to prevent them from getting him, and laid on the horn. His wife Myrtle was upstairs, clutching her own needful thing, a magnificent doll. She had just returned from a terrifying errand of her own. To pay for the doll, she had been forced to slip a venomous, obscene note into the agenda of the Daughters of Isabella meeting. The guilt was eating her alive, but the comfort of the doll was her opium. When she finally went down to the garage, the scene turned violent. Buster, consumed by insanity, accused her of conspiring with Deputy Norris Ridgwick. The tragedy of the Keatons is that they are both victims of Gaunt, locked in a cage of madness. Buster brutally attacked her, smashing her head against the car door and tormenting her with a hammer. It's a visceral, ugly scene that strips away the supernatural veneer and shows the raw human cruelty Gaunt unleashes. He demanded to know if she had slept with the deputy, his reality completely fractured. Myrtle, bleeding and terrified, managed to flee the immediate violence, but the sanctity of their home was shattered beyond repair. Back at the Camber farm, the sun was casting long shadows as Ace Merrill arrived. He was high on adrenaline and the promise of millions. He located the first dig site marked on his map and unearthed a paint can. His excitement peaked, then crashed instantly. It was filled with nothing but worthless, defunct trading stamps. The fury he felt was volcanic. He felt mocked by his dead uncle. But Ace was nothing if not persistent. He remembered the second cross on the map. He grabbed his tools and sprinted toward the back of the barn, convinced this was the classic bait and switch. The trash was a decoy for the treasure. In his haste, he tripped over the very shovel Polly had discarded earlier. He saw the disturbed earth. He saw the flat rock tossed aside. Someone had beaten him to it. The despair of the addict who has lost his fix washed over him, quickly replaced by a homicidal rage. He dug into the loose soil with his bare hands, retrieving the Crisco can Polly had reburied. He tore it open, expecting emptiness. Instead, he found a letter addressed to him. This is the moment the trap snaps shut. The letter was not signed by Leland Gaunt. It was a forgery, drafted by Gaunt, but signed by Sheriff Alan Pangborn. The letter was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It taunted Ace, claiming that the sheriff had been blackmailing Pop Merrill for years, had found the map, and had already dug up the $200,000 stash. The text jeered at Ace, calling him names, bragging about sending him to prison, and warning him to back off or face a violent end. It was perfectly calculated to push every single one of Ace's buttons: his hatred of authority, his greed, his humiliation, and his rivalry with Pangborn. Inside the second envelope was the final insult, a single $1 bill, a share of the fortune. Ace screamed into the empty air of the Camber lot. The sound was raw, primal. In that moment, Leland Gaunt's manipulation was complete. Ace didn't suspect a supernatural shopkeeper. He didn't suspect he was being played. He believed with total certainty that Alan Pangborn had stolen his inheritance. Ace Merrill pocketed the dollar, his mind cold and sharp with a singular purpose. He wasn't just a thug anymore. He was a weapon aimed directly at the heart of the town's law and order. He walked back to his car, not with the stagger of a junkie, but with the terrifying focus of a killer. Chapter 19. The atmosphere in Castle Rock has shifted from tension to an oppressive, suffocating weight. It is 6:15, and a twilight that feels entirely unnatural is bruising the sky. Thunderheads are stacking up like black towers on the horizon, a physical manifestation of the psychological storm breaking over the town. Stephen King is a master of using weather as a Greek chorus, and here, the oncoming storm signals that the time for subtle manipulation is over. The streetlights flicker on early, sensing the unnatural darkness. Down on Lower Main Street, it's a circus. The media has arrived. You have this chaotic juxtaposition of tragedy and spectacle. TV vans, cables snaking across the pavement, reporters rehearsing their grim faces for the camera. They are focused on the aftermath of the violence we've already seen. The body of Lester Pratt being wheeled out. But King uses this scene to highlight a terrifying irony. Everyone is looking at the scene of the past crime, while 300 yards away, on the deserted Upper Main Street, the real crime is currently in progress. While the police are distracted by the corpses, a steady trickle of junkies is heading to Needful things. The shop is closed, the shades drawn. But the desperate residents of Castle Rock, driven by an addiction to their items and a thirst for revenge, find the pattern. They go to the alley, and there, bathed in a slice of yellow light, Leland Gaunt is holding court. This is a pivotal moment for Gaunt's characterization. He isn't just a shopkeeper anymore. He has shed the pretense of the retail store. He's sitting at a folding table in the alley, taking cash and dispensing weapons. King gives us a glimpse into Gaunt's ancient history here, and it is chilling. We learn that Gaunt feels more at home in the dirt and wind than he ever did behind a glass counter. He remembers wandering Europe during the Black Plague, a peddler following the death carts, selling wares to the doomed. He is an entity that thrives on the collapse of civilization. He isn't just selling guns. He is selling the final push over the edge. He charges exactly what they can afford, financially at least. The spiritual cost is, of course, total. Meanwhile, Sheriff Alan Pangborn is effectively exiled. He's sitting in a hospital wing in Bridgeton, miles away from the collapse of his town. He's staring at a mural of Simple Simon, a mocking reminder of how little he understands. Alan is trying to interview Sean Rusk, hoping the traumatized boy can explain why his brother Brian committed suicide. But he is stonewalled by a nurse. Alan is stuck in a bureaucratic limbo while his town burns. Alan begins to mentally tally the scoreboard, and it is a bloodbath. Lester Pratt is dead. John LaPointe is hospitalized. Hugh Priest and Billy Tupper are dead. Henry Beaufort is critical, and Norris Ridgwick is missing. But the worst news comes when he finally gets Deputy Clutt on the phone. We learn that the madness has escalated to pure butchery. Buster Keaton has killed his wife, Myrtle, and not cleanly. He used a hammer. This is the moment Alan realizes he has been outmaneuvered. The state police have taken over, but they are clumsy outsiders who don't understand the web of grudges Gaunt has woven. They are focusing on the individual explosions, not the fuse connecting them. Alan learns that the gun Hugh Priest used was a strange, unidentifiable automatic. He also learns that a note was found near Henry Beaufort's vandalized car, referencing frogs, a slur designed to trigger Beaufort. It's the same pattern we saw with Wilma and Nettie, false flags planted to ensure mutual destruction. Alan tries to coordinate from afar, sensing that if he can just find the common denominator, he can stop it. But he is painfully far away. We then cut to the psychological disintegration of Polly Chalmers. She is lying in bed, the heat of the room stifling her, listening to the phone ring. It's Alan, but she won't answer. This is the tragedy of Polly's character right now. Her pride has been weaponized. She feels betrayed by Alan's investigation into her past, but deep down, a voice is gnawing at her. The voice of her dead Aunt Evie. This internal monologue is fascinating. It's her subconscious screaming at her to wake up. The voice challenges her self-righteousness, asking who lied first. But Polly is paralyzed by the Azka charm. She feels the physical sensation of the spider moving inside the silver casing against her skin. Whether this is a hallucination or supernatural reality doesn't matter. The psychological effect is the same. She is terrified of Gaunt, terrified of the debt she owes, and terrified that the cure for her arthritis is eating her alive. She chooses to wallow in her anger at Ace Merrill rather than face the truth, allowing the isolation to deepen. Back at the station, Henry Peyton, the state police investigator, gets a call that changes the genre of this story from crime thriller to supernatural horror. The medical examiner reports that Henry Beaufort died in the ambulance, but it wasn't the bullet holes that killed him. It was a massive, fast-acting systemic toxicity. The bullets were coated in something that caused his heart to literally burst. This is a crucial detail. It confirms that the weapons Gaunt is distributing in the alley aren't just guns, they are cursed artifacts. The medical examiner warns that simply touching the gun or the ammo clip could be lethal. The corruption of Needful things is now biological as well as spiritual. The infection is spreading. Finally, we witness the absolute ruin of Cora Rusk. After the suicide of her son Brian, she has retreated completely into madness. She ignores the police in her house and puts on the Elvis sunglasses she bought from Gaunt, desperate to escape to her fantasy of Graceland. But Gaunt's gifts always turn on the buyer. When Cora enters the vision of Graceland, she doesn't find solace. She finds her friend, Myra Evans, having sex with Elvis. In the hallucination, Myra mocks her and breaks the sunglasses. When Cora snaps out of the trance, the glasses are broken in reality. Her sanctuary is destroyed. This breaks the last tether of sanity holding Cora to the earth. She doesn't care about her dead son. She cares about the broken artifact. In a scene of grotesque absurdity, she walks through town to the alley behind Needful things. She is half naked, her dress unbuttoned, exposing her body, but she is past the point of shame. She is a creature of pure id now. She finds Gaunt in the alley. She pours out her hatred for Myra Evans. Gaunt, playing the role of the sympathetic therapist, validates her insanity. He agrees that breaking a treasured possession is a capital offense. He doesn't offer comfort, he offers a solution. He hands the half-naked, raving woman an automatic pistol. The chapter ends with the transaction complete. The stage is set. The storm is overhead. The police are distracted. The good people are isolated or broken, and the lunatics have been armed with poisoned weapons. Everything must go. Chapter 20. The descent into madness is rarely a straight line. Often it is a jagged, spiraling plummet. For Buster Keaton, the immediate aftermath of murdering his wife Myrtle wasn't a roar of triumph, but a hollow, crushing silence. He slipped into a fugue state, that peculiar psychological detachment where the mind tries to distance itself from the horrors the hands have committed. The righteous anger against them, that faceless, persecuting collective he believed was out to get him, evaporated, leaving only a throbbing headache and the physical ache of a man who has just bludgeoned another human being to death. He stood there, staring at the hammer in his hand until it fell, clattering against the kitchen floor. The blood splatter it left behind looked like a Rorschach test of his father's face, a grim reminder that violence often echoes through generations. Buster retreated to his study, dragging the weight of his crime and the literal weight of the handcuff still dangling from his wrist. He sought solace in the object of his obsession, the winning ticket game he had purchased from Leland Gaunt. But the human mind is a fragile projector. When the bulb burns out, the picture fades. Buster looked at the game and saw only a sordid, broken toy covered in his wife's blood. The magic was gone. The tin horses were askew, the colours dull. Panic set in. He believed they had infiltrated his sanctuary, ruining his prize just as they had ruined his life. But a small dying voice of reason whispered a terrifying truth. The game had always been junk. He had traded his soul for trash. This is the moment where a man might seek redemption, or at least the finality of a bullet. Buster reached for his gun, intending to end it all. But Leland Gaunt, the puppet master of Castle Rock, knows exactly when to pull the strings. The phone rang. Mr. Gaunt's voice on the line was not sympathetic. It was surgically precise. When Buster confessed his despair and the broken state of the game, Gaunt challenged him to look again. And here we see the power of suggestion on a fractured psyche. Under Gaunt's direction, Buster's hallucination rebooted. The blood on the box transformed into deep, rich colors. The broken tin horses stood tall and proud. The delusion returned, stronger than before. Gaunt didn't just sell items. He sold a distorted reality. He chastised Buster for his weakness, goading him, questioning his manhood, until the spark of violence was fanned back into a flame. Gaunt told him it wasn't too late. There were allies, a team. Buster, revitalized by this toxic validation, pledged his loyalty. He was no longer a murderer cowering in a house of death. He was a soldier in a holy war against them. Following Gaunt's instructions, Buster transformed himself. He utilized a wig and glasses provided in a getaway van, staring into the mirror to see a stranger looking back. He looked younger, capable, a protagonist in his own thriller movie. Using a volatile acid solution, he freed himself from the handcuffs, the burning chemical smell mixing with the metallic scent of blood. As he drove away in the anonymous van, the authorities were descending on his home. They found the body of Myrtle Keaton, but the killer had dissolved into the stormy night, slipping through the cracks of a town rapidly falling apart. Meanwhile, the poison Gaunt had injected into the community continued to circulate. Eddie Warburton, the custodian who had long suffered the stinging indignity of racism in Castle Rock, reached his breaking point. His grievance was with Sonny Jacket, a mechanic who had cheated him. But Gaunt had stoked this fire with anonymous notes and artifacts, twisting old wounds until they demanded blood. Eddie marched into the Sunoco station, armed with a pistol from Needful Things. He was disassociated, watching himself from above, an evil imp at the controls. He fired into the man sitting by the register, screaming his vengeance. But tragedy in Castle Rock is rarely clean. The man he executed wasn't Sonny Jacket. It was Ricky Bissonette. Eddie had killed the wrong man. Before the horror of his mistake could fully register, the real Sonny Jacket emerged from the back. Sonny, equally armed and equally poisoned by Gaunt's manipulations, didn't hesitate. He gunned Eddie down. As Eddie lay dying, trying to warn Sonny that they had both been played for fools, Sonny executed him with a cold indifference. He didn't care about the truth. He only cared about his prized socket wrenches. This scene illustrates the terrifying efficiency of Gaunt's plan. The victims are too busy killing each other over trinkets to realize who the real enemy is. The chaos rippled outward. At the Keaton residence, police swarmed. At the Sunoco station, bodies piled up, and up on Castle View, the madness claimed another innocent. Lenore Potter, obsessed with protecting her flower garden from a rival, lay in wait with a gun. When a figure appeared in the gloom, she fired, filled with the grim satisfaction of protecting her territory. But when she turned the body over, it wasn't her rival Stephanie. It was Melissa Clutterbuck, the deputy's wife. In her blind obsession, Lenore had murdered a woman who had simply wandered into the crosshairs of a town gone mad. While the streets ran red, Sheriff Alan Pangborn sat in the quiet, sterile air of the hospital, trying to salvage the truth from a traumatized child. He visited Sean Rusk, the little boy who had witnessed his brother Brian's suicide. This scene is a heartbreaking contrast to the violence outside. Alan, suppressing his own grief over his lost family, performed magic tricks for the boy. The folding flower trick. It's a melancholic callback to simpler times, but the trick is old and the springs are tired, much like the sheriff himself. Sean, heavily medicated but lucid in that eerie way children can be, dropped the final pieces of the puzzle into Alan's lap. He revealed that his mother wore sunglasses to visit the king, Elvis, behind closed doors. But more importantly, Sean spoke of his brother's terror. Brian had called Needful Things a poison place, and Mr. Gaunt a poison man. The innocence of the child cut through the deception that had blinded the adults. Sean revealed that Brian had been manipulated through a baseball card, just as everyone else had been manipulated by their heart's desire. And then, the chilling kicker, Sean told Alan that Brian had said Mr. Gaunt wasn't a man at all. Alan Pangborn finally understood. The doubts he had harbored about Polly's strange behavior, the coincidences, the escalating violence, it all pointed to the shopkeeper. He left the hospital, a man on fire. He tried to radio for help, but the storm, a supernatural tempest mirroring the town's destruction, scrambled the signals. He managed to relay a message to the state police to arrest Leland Gaunt, but as he raced back toward Castle Rock, one gets the sinking feeling that the law is no match for what is happening. Back in town, the ultimate bully, Ace Merrill, was having a very bad night. He had spent hours digging in muddy fields for buried treasure promised by Gaunt, only to find worthless junk. Enraged and feeling cheated, Ace stormed back to town intending to kill Alan Pangborn. But the town he returned to was a war zone of flashing lights and police tape. Ace sought out Gaunt, demanding weaponry and answers. He found the shopkeeper closing up. What follows is the moment the mask drops completely. When Ace tried to threaten him, Gaunt retaliated with supernatural force. He lifted the thug into the air with impossible strength. Ace stared into Gaunt's face and saw the facade of humanity melt away. He saw steam venting from the creature's paws, eyes full of hellfire, and a tongue that was forked and serpentine. This transformation confirms the cosmic horror at play. Gaunt is not merely a criminal mastermind. He is an entity of ancient, malevolent evil. He terrified Ace into submission, not with money, but with the raw promise of eternal suffering. He gave Ace a bag of cocaine, fuel for the work ahead, and a new directive: blow Castle Rock off the face of the map. Ace, high on fear and the white powder, stumbled out to the alley where Buster Keaton was waiting in the van. It is a meeting of two different kinds of monsters. Buster, the broken psychotic holding on to a delusion of order, and Ace, the nihilistic predator who just wants to watch the world burn. Ace bullied his way into the partnership, handing Buster a gun and demanding he open the back of the van. Inside, Buster had stockpiled the tools of their new trade, massive amounts of explosives. Buster, grinning with the maniacal joy of a man who has finally found his purpose, welcomed Ace. They have the dynamite, they have the blasting caps, and as the thunder rolls over the doomed town of Castle Rock, the fuse is effectively lit. The sleep-to-law journey has moved from suspense to impending apocalypse. Chapter 21. The fragile peace of Castle Rock was about to be shattered, not by a natural disaster, but by the sheer accumulated weight of petty hatred. At the center of this spiritual rot stood two men of God, or perhaps more accurately, two men of ego. First, we have the Reverend William Rose of the United Baptist Church. Rose was a man defined by a charisma that was matched only by his profound, bone-deep bigotry. Since 1983, he had been feeding his flock a steady diet of anti-Catholic rhetoric, painting the Vatican as a house of torture and sexual deviancy. It wasn't just theology to him, it was sport. On the other side of the ring stood Father John Brigham. If Rose was the fire, Brigham was the flint, a humorless, combative Irishman who didn't believe in turning the other cheek. He believed in returning fire. When Rose preached about the whore of Rome, Brigham retaliated with sermons attacking Rose's intelligence and integrity. What we are seeing here is the classic psychological projection of the fanatic. Both men saw the devil in the other because they refused to look in the mirror. For years, this was a cold war. Insults hurled from pulpits, schoolyard taunts, the occasional broken window. But Leland Gaunt, the proprietor of Needful Things, understands that hate is like dry timber. It just needs the right spark. That spark was Casino Night, a Catholic fundraiser that Rose viewed as a moral abomination. Gaunt didn't create the anger. He simply weaponized it with forged letters and obscene notes, playing on the deepest insecurities of both clergymen. By the time October 31st arrived, reason had left the building. On this rainy night, the tension finally snapped. At the Baptist church, Reverend Rose faced a packed house. He was ready to whip them into a frenzy, but the doors burst open to reveal Don Hemphill, the local butcher. Don was a walking nightmare, blood-stained, weeping, and smelling of a stench so foul it defied description. He had been skunked at his store, his inventory ruined. But the masterstroke here was the evidence Don produced: a Roman collar and Catholic flyers planted at the scene. It was a lie, of course, a fabrication by Gaunt, but to a crowd already primed for victimhood, it was gospel truth. Then the trap sprung. A box hidden in the choir loft began to hiss. It wasn't just a prank. It was psychological warfare. A cloud of chemical putrescence smelling of sulfur and rot flooded the church. This is where the veneer of civilization peels away. Panic is immediate and total. In their desperate stampede to escape the fumes, the Baptists trampled their own. Bones snapped, dignity evaporated, and the congregation was reduced to a heaving, vomiting mass of terrified animals. The doors, naturally, had been jammed shut. They were rats in a cage of their own making. Simultaneously, across town, the Catholics were walking into their own ambush. Babs Miller, acting as one of Gaunt's unwitting agents, had rigged the daughters of Isabella Hall. Inside, Betsy Veig found a planted note calling her a Pope whore. Before the shock could register, their own stink bomb detonated. The scene at the Catholic Hall turned from a meeting to a slaughterhouse of panic. In the chaos, Antonia Bissett, a woman who had never hurt a soul, was shoved backward. Her neck snapped against a table. She died amidst the stench and the screams, a casualty of a war she didn't even know she was fighting. This is the dark genius of Gaunt's plan. The innocent always suffer for the sins of the self-righteous. The Catholic men meeting nearby heard the screams. They rushed to help, only to be hit by their own gas attack. When they finally broke out into the rain, retching and gasping, they didn't see neighbors or friends. They saw an enemy force. Back at the Baptist church, Nan Roberts, a woman whose rage was as formidable as her physical strength, managed to heave Reverend Rose through a stained glass window. The Baptists spilled out onto the lawn, a ragged army of the sick and furious. But instead of going home, instead of seeking medical attention for their broken limbs and burning lungs, they coalesced. The mob mentality took over completely. Led by a filth-covered Don Hemphill, they began to march, and they began to sing. Onward, Christian soldiers. It is a chilling image. A mob reeking of vomit and sulfur, marching through a thunderstorm, perverting a hymn of faith into a battle cry for blood. A young state trooper named Morris witnessed this procession. He was the voice of sanity, trying to report the madness to his superiors, but he was hopelessly out of his depth. The infrastructure of law and order was crumbling under the weight of the town's collective insanity. While the armies marched, a smaller, intimate tragedy played out in the home of Chuck and Myra Evans. Cora Rusk, driven mad by jealousy over Elvis Presley, yes, the dead singer, broke in to kill Myra. This subplot highlights the absurdity of the violence in Castle Rock. They weren't fighting for survival. They were killing each other over fantasies and memorabilia sold to them by a demon. In a short, brutal gunfight, Cora was shot in the throat and died, while Myra was left wounded. 2 lives destroyed for a picture of the king. Back on the streets, the inevitable collision occurred. The Catholic faction, led by Father Brigham and the hulking Albert Gendron, met the Baptist army at the intersection. There was no hesitation, no moment of clarity, just the sickening crunch of impact. This wasn't a scuffle, it was primal warfare. Albert Gendron was smashing skulls together. Nan Roberts was gouging eyes. People were biting, clawing, and screaming in the pouring rain, illuminated by strobe light flashes of lightning. It was a Boschian painting come to life, a hellscape of religious fervor twisted into murderous rage. Trooper Morris tried to stop it. He fired a warning shot, a futile gesture against the tide of chaos. In response, someone in the crowd shot him in the groin with a pistol bought from Needful Things. He went down screaming, another symbol of authority utterly destroyed. Leland Gaunt had sold guns to many of these people, and now those guns were coming out. The crack of pistol fire mixed with the thunder. Len Milliken broke a man's wrist only to be stabbed in the neck, paralyzed instantly. The violence was escalating exponentially, feeding on itself. In the center of the storm, Father Brigham and Reverend Rose finally found each other. Brigham, his shirt torn open, was pounding Rose's face into a bloody pulp. It was the physical manifestation of their years of verbal sparring, the theology stripped away to reveal the raw animal hatred underneath. But the fight wasn't over. Nan Roberts, seeing her pastor being beaten, threw aside her opponent and launched herself at the priest like a missile. The storm raged above, but the true tempest was on the ground. Castle Rock had ceased to be a community. It was now a slaughterhouse, and the butcher's bill was coming due. Chapter 22. The gale battered the windshield of the station wagon, reducing the world to a watery blur. But the storm raging outside was nothing compared to the clarity finally dawning within Alan Pangborn's mind. For days, his psyche had been protecting him with a stout locked door labeled, "This makes no sense." The human mind often utilizes cognitive dissonance as a shield, refusing to process data that overturns its reality. But the key Sean Rusk handed him had shattered the lock. The truth was no longer behind a door. It was sitting in a shop on Main Street, Needful Things, and the puppet master, Leland Gaunt. As Alan crawled the car forward, the causal web of Castle Rock's destruction became horrifyingly clear. It was a transaction of souls. Brian Rusk traded his life for a baseball card. Nettie Cobb traded her sanity for a lampshade. They were all just thirsty travelers drinking poisoned water from a vendor who smiled as he watched them choke. Even Polly, Alan's own heart, had purchased a magic charm to soothe her hands, buying relief with spiritual currency she didn't know she was spending. He crossed the tin bridge just as lightning cleaved an ancient elm, sending it crashing into the stream. It was a symbolic severing. The old Castle Rock was dying, toppled by the electric chaos of one man's influence. The town centre was a tableau of abandonment and panic. Police cruisers darted aimlessly like confused beetles. The command structure had collapsed. This wasn't just a crime wave, it was an orchestration of entropy. Gaunt hadn't just sold items, he had sold the means of mutual destruction, turning neighbours into sleeping agents of chaos, waiting for a trigger. Alan drove on, ignoring the screams carried on the wind. He had to cut the head off the snake. Meanwhile, in a lonely shed, Deputy Norris Ridgwick stood on a stool, preparing to make the ultimate payment. The guilt of his actions, the tires slashed, the pain caused, weighed heavier than the rope around his neck. He was ready to hang himself for a Bazan fishing rod. This is the darkest depth of Gaunt's manipulation, the induction of suicidal shame. But as Norris prepared to kick the stool, the lightning flickered. and for a split second, the glamour failed. He looked at his prize, the basin rod, and screamed. It wasn't a masterpiece of graphite and craftsmanship. It was a dirty, splintered bamboo pole with a rusty reel. The illusion of value, which Gaunt projects onto his junk, had evaporated in the harsh light of impending death. A voice in Norris's head, perhaps Gaunt's lingering influence, or perhaps his own survival instinct manifesting as rage, taunted him. But the visual evidence was undeniable. He had sold his honor for garbage. The spell broke, replaced by a hot, cleansing fury. Norris didn't kick the stool. He scrambled down and snapped the bamboo stick over his knee. It was an act of psychological reclamation. By destroying the object of his obsession, he reclaimed his agency. He wasn't going to die tonight. He was going to hunt down the man who made him hate himself. Across town, Polly Chalmers was trapped in a nightmare that was bleeding into reality. In her sleep, she visited a twisted version of the shop, manned not by Gaunt, but by her dead Aunt Evie. The subconscious often uses familiar, trusted avatars to deliver warnings the conscious mind refuses to hear. Dream Evie offered a chilling diagnosis. The cure Polly bought for her arthritis wasn't healing her. It was a transferal. The pain was being moved from her hands to her heart and soul. Polly woke to the crash of thunder, clutching the silver Azka charm. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The letter she had found, the one accusing Alan of investigating her past, was just another manipulated item, a wedge driven between them to isolate her. She had believed it out of pride. Pride. That deadly sin Gaunt exploited so masterfully. "Fuck pride," she screamed into the darkness. She ripped the charm from her neck and hurled it against the wall. The moment the talisman left her person, the suppression of her pain ceased. But something far worse was released. The charm cracked open, and a spider crawled out. This wasn't a normal arachnid. It was a manifestation of the corruption she had been wearing against her skin. It grew with impossible speed, feeding on the evil unleashed in the room. This scene represents the physical manifestation of a toxic dependency. When you finally cast it aside, the withdrawal fights back. The spider, now the size of a cat, with a bristly pulsating body and dripping fangs, cornered her in the bathroom. Polly didn't cower. She grabbed a toilet plunger, a mundane, ridiculous weapon against a supernatural horror, and fought. The battle was visceral and gross, a desperate struggle against a parasite that had been intimate with her body. She impaled the creature, crushing it until it dissolved into a pile of sludge, which then shrank back to a tiny dead spider. The hallucination of size was gone, but the danger was real. She had purged the poison. Now she had to find Alan. While individual redemptions played out for Norris and Polly, the agents of destruction were busy. Ace Merrill and Selectman Buster Keaton were navigating the storm in a cocaine-fueled haze. Keaton had fully dissociated, his mind shattered by stress and Gaunt's pressure, believing he was a character in a comic strip. They were planting dynamite around the town, at the bridge, the funeral home, the bank. They were Gaunt's heavy artillery. While Gaunt operated on the psychological level, destroying bonds and trust, Ace and Buster provided the physical devastation. They were giddy, manic, completely detached from the morality of their actions, acting as pure vessels of nihilism. They moved through the rain like dark Santas, leaving ticking gifts that would soon turn the town into a crater. Alan pulled up to Needful Things. The shop was dark, the windows dead eyes reflecting the lightning. He sat for a moment, gripping a tin can he had found on the floorboard, a snake in a nut can prank toy. It was a small thing, but symbolic. It was a trick, a piece of misdirection. Alan realized he was walking into the lair of the ultimate trickster. To fight Gaunt, he needed to understand the nature of the prank, the promise of something good that delivers a bite. He smashed the glass and entered. The interior was impossible. It wasn't the stocked emporium everyone had seen all week. It was dusty, barren, empty. The shelves were bare. The air smelled of ancient, undisturbed time. This creates a terrifying ontological shift. It implies that the store was never really there in the physical sense. It was a psychic projection, a mirror showing people what they wanted to see. Gaunt didn't stock goods, he stocked desires. But Gaunt had left one thing behind. On a dusty counter sat a television and a VCR, with a note addressed to Sheriff Pangborn. The note was mocking, perfectly polite, and utterly sadistic. Gaunt promised answers about the death of Alan's wife and son. It was the ultimate bait. Even now, with the curtain pulled back, Gaunt knew exactly which lever to pull to destroy Alan Pangborn. He offered closure, the one commodity Alan couldn't resist. Alan stared at the tape. The devil's voice is sweet to hear, and his traps are baited with our deepest sorrows. He plugged in the machine. The storm howled outside. Ace's dynamite ticked down in the dark, and Alan prepared to look into the electronic abyss, unknowingly racing against the fuse of a town ready to explode. Chapter 23. The fuse of Castle Rock had been burning for weeks, sparked by petty grievances and fanned by a merchant who sold nothing but illusions. Now the powder keg finally blew. At exactly 7:38 p.m, the tin bridge, a fixture of the town's geography and history, was erased from existence. Ace Merrill's crude engineering worked perfectly. The explosion wasn't just a sound, it was a declaration of war. The iron structure was torn from its foundations, twisting like a dying snake before crashing into the swollen waters of Castle Stream. Down on Castle Avenue, the riot between the Catholics and the Baptists froze for a heartbeat. The sky was lit by the fire rose of the bridge, a perverse signal fire. But in this town, sanity had long since packed its bags and left. Instead of realizing the danger, the combatants simply incorporated the destruction into their paranoia. Nan Roberts, perched atop a battered priest like a vulture in a waitress uniform, didn't see a tragedy. She saw a tactical escalation. She screamed that the Catholics were using dynamite. It didn't matter that it was a lie. In Leland Gaunt's version of reality, the lie is always more seductive than the truth. The violence didn't stop, it surged. The explosion was simply the dinner bell for the chaotic feast. Meanwhile, Deputy Norris Ridgwick was trying to salvage what was left of the law. He found the sheriff's office abandoned, save for a terrified Seton Thomas and a confused state trooper. The chaos outside was absolute, but the horror inside was quieter. Seton Thomas sat there, convinced he was dying, weeping not for himself, but for the town. He knew with the instinct of a prey animal that the bridge was just the opening act. They were going to blow it all up. Norris, desperate to find Sheriff Pangborn, stumbled out into the rain and straight into the architects of the night's disaster. In the alleyway, illuminated by lightning, stood Ace Merrill and the fallen selectman, Danforth Buster Keaton. It's a classic king pairing, the sociopathic bully and the bureaucratic coward, united by insanity. Norris tried to follow procedure, tried to be the good cop, but the rules of civilization had been suspended. The explosions rippled down the street, the barbershop, the funeral home, shattering the night. In that distraction, Ace made his move. He didn't hesitate. He put bullets into Norris and the young trooper, dropping them into the mud. But the true depth of Ace's depravity revealed itself a moment later. When Buster Keaton, his partner in crime, was wounded in the crossfire, Ace didn't help him. He didn't panic. He tormented him. With the cold detachment of a child pulling wings off a fly, Ace executed Buster to cure his pain. This is the nature of the evil Gaunt cultivates. It destroys its own tools when they are no longer useful. Ace left the carnage behind, his mind fixed on two things: getting his money from Gaunt and settling the score with the sheriff. Across town, Sheriff Alan Pangborn was trapped in a hell of his own making. He sat before a blank screen in the darkened back room of Needful Things, holding a videocassette. Gaunt had left it for him, a poisoned gift promising answers about the death of his wife and son. This is the psychological genius of Leland Gaunt. He weaponizes the victim's need for closure. Alan watched the tape. It showed the accident. It showed the moment his family died. But it showed something else, something impossible. It showed Ace Merrill at the scene, causing the crash. It was a fabrication, a high-tech hallucination conjured by the shopkeeper. But to Alan's grief-stricken mind, it was absolute truth. The tape bypassed his logic and hot-wired his rage. A voice in his head, cold, mechanical, insane, began to chant instructions. Get him! He lives in Mechanic Falls. This is how Gaunt wins. He doesn't just sell objects, he sells narratives. He rewrote the history of Alan's trauma to turn the sheriff into a guided missile aimed away from Castle Rock. Alan stood up, a hollow man filled with artificial purpose, and walked out into the burning night, leaving the town to die. Outside the courthouse, another absurdist tragedy played out. Frank Jewett and George Nelson, two men whose lives had been dismantled by Gaunt's pranks, faced off in the rain. They screamed accusations about parakeets and blackmail, their grievances seeming utterly childish against the backdrop of the apocalypse. They agreed to a duel, a cowboy shootout in the rain. They fired, they missed, and they began to laugh at the sheer stupidity of it all. They were on the verge of reconciliation, of waking up from the nightmare. But the timer on the municipal building reached zero. The explosion that followed dwarfed everything else. It was the heart of the town being ripped out. The municipal building disintegrated, vaporizing Frank and George in an instant. The blast was so powerful it sent vehicles flying like toys and shattered windows miles away. It was the death knell of Castle Rock as it had existed. The violence was no longer a riot. It was an erasure. Alan Pangborn was driving through this inferno, blind to it, fixated on his drive to Mechanic Falls. He nearly ran over Polly Chalmers in the street. Polly, whose body was racked with pain from the cure Gaunt had sold her, had ripped off her charm. She had chosen the agony of reality over the comfort of the lie. She screamed at Alan, trying to break through the hypnotic shell Gaunt had encased him in. She realized what Alan couldn't. Gaunt always oversteps. His pride is his flaw. She forced Alan to question the tape, to look at the cracks in the illusion. She challenged him to take off his own charm, his grief. "Hinky Pinky Spider," she told him. "It's a metaphor for the poison Gaunt injects, the thing that eats your pain but consumes your soul in the process." Just as the fog in Alan's mind began to lift, Ace Merrill emerged from the smoke, grabbing Polly. He held a gun to her head, demanding the money he thought Alan had stolen. It was a standoff in the ruins of the world. And then, the shopkeeper emerged. Leland Gaunt stepped out of Needful Things, not looking like a monster, but like a weary traveler. He carried a valise made of hyena hide, a bag that pulsed and breathed. Inside were the souls he had harvested, screaming in a frequency felt rather than heard. He watched the scene with irritation. He had won. The town was destroyed, and he just wanted to leave with his winnings. But Alan Pangborn had finally woken up. His mind, sharpened by years of detective work, latched onto the one detail Gaunt had missed in his forged video. In the tape, his wife was wearing her seatbelt. In reality, she hadn't been. The illusion shattered. Alan realized the power Gaunt held wasn't absolute. It relied on belief. It relied on the victims accepting the reality Gaunt presented. Alan decided to present a new reality. He reached into his pocket, grabbing a can of Tasty Munch nuts, a practical joke item he'd taken from the shop earlier. He opened it, and a paper snake sprang out. But fueled by Alan's will and the residual magical charge of the atmosphere, the snake became real. It struck Gaunt, biting him. For the first time, the untouchable merchant bled. He shrieked, dropping his valise. This is the turning point. Gaunt is an ancient creature, perhaps a demon, perhaps the devil himself, but he is bound by rules of trade and belief. When Alan rejected the product, the transaction failed. Alan snatched the valise, the collected souls of Castle Rock. Gaunt's human mask slipped, his face elongated, his eyes burning with the fires of the pit. He demanded his property. But Alan Pangborn, standing amidst the rubble of his town, tapped into something primal. King often writes of the white, a force of elemental good that opposes the chaos of the dark. Alan performed a magic trick, a simple sleight of hand he had done 1,000 times for children. He produced a bouquet of flowers from his sleeve, but this time they weren't paper, they were pure, blinding light. It was a manifestation of pure will, a cleansing radiance that burned the shadows away. Alan held the light like a weapon, driving the creature back. He commanded the demon to leave. It wasn't a request. It was an eviction notice served by the guardian of the chaotic terrain. Gaunt, shrieking in pain and frustration, retreated. He scrambled into his car, the Tucker Talisman. As he fled, the vehicle began to transform, shedding its modern disguise. It melted and reshaped itself into a black, horse-drawn wagon, the kind that traveled the back roads centuries ago, peddling snake oil and damnation. The wagon lifted into the air, flying over the burning ruins of the town, disappearing into the smoke. The valise burst open. The trapped souls escaped, dissipating like steam. The poison drained from Polly's body. The madness that had gripped the town evaporated with the rain. The aftermath was quiet, heavy with the weight of what had been lost. Norris Ridgwick, bleeding but alive, wept for his role in the disaster. But Polly offered the only absolution available. They were all responsible, but they were also all victims. The important thing was that they had refused to make the final purchase. Alan and Polly drove out of Castle Rock. They left the burning town behind, disappearing into the darkness. They would never know the full truth of the past, but they had reclaimed their future. They chose to let the darkness bear the burden of the unexplained. Epilogue. You've been here before. Junction City, Iowa. A nice little town, a quiet town. The sun is shining, and down on the main drag, the old realty office has finally been leased. There's a new sign out front, answered prayers, a new kind of store, and standing there looking at the sign is the former high school principal. She has rheumatism, you see, she's in pain. She's looking for something, and she'll go inside. They always do. The name of the town changes, the faces change, but the hunger remains. And as long as there is something you think you can't live without, the shop will always be open for business. Caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. Let the buyer